Alright, what is going on, everyone? Welcome! We are live. I accidentally turned the music all the way off, but, you know. We are live, and I'm completely messing up my, my overlay. Oh god. I just clicked my overlay, and the whole thing messed up, because that is what I do when I'm streaming. Welcome to another Tuesday here on the Fuzzy Dice Show. My name is Askren. I'm your host, and I have a great show for you guys today, because I have sitting on that side of me, I have an awesome guest named Adam KOEBEL. What's going on, Adam?
Oh, you know, playing some Dungeons and Dragons. That's what's going on with me. I just finished GMing a show, so I'm still in like GM brain mode.
Yeah. No, actually, I caught the end of it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll try not to kill you during the show. I mean, if I ask you for like perception checks, just remind me I'm not in charge here, and I don't have to worry about that shit.
I mean, it would be it would actually be it would be a first on this show if someone like killed me on stream. But yeah,
it's surprisingly easy to do. How many hit points you got?
I don't have my sheet in front of me. I don't know, like 15 maybe.
15? What class are you? You're like a wizard? How's your Constitution bonus?
No, I rolled shit on Constitution.
Yeah, okay. I feel that.
I clearly put all my points into Charisma.
We can just do that thing where we just role play the whole session and nobody actually plays the game. That's fine. That happens sometimes.
So Adam is going to be hanging out with me and talking all kinds of DM stuff because as you guys know, well, some of you may not know, you're hanging out here on Fuzzy Dice, the DM show, your DM show here on the Exploding Dice channel, where we talk about everything and anything related to dungeon mastering and role playing and all that good stuff. So, I guess why don't we? Do you want to let us know a little bit about your credentials? Like, what kind of background do you come from when it comes to DMing? Yeah. Where did you get your start, and how did you kind of get to where you are now?
Yeah, totally. So I've been playing tabletop role playing games since I was like probably 10 or so. So 20 plus years now. And I'm the perennial GM, right? I'm the person in my group that cares the most about role playing games. So I often end up being the one that teaches them and runs them, though not always the case. And I'm probably, I guess, best known for one of two things now, right? If people know the name Adam KOEBEL, they know it from either my work on Dungeon World, which is a award-winning tabletop role-playing game that I co-designed with Sage LaTorra a few years back, or they know me from the old Twitchosphere vis-a-vis roleplay or Roll20. So I'm the GM in residence at Roll20, which is a virtual tabletop system that lots of people use to play role-playing games online. And then I'm head GM for a property called Roleplay over at ItMeJP, and we've been running games for a few years now. I'm the GM of Swan Song, Mirror Shades. We just finished a Star Wars game called Balance of Power, and I'm running a 5th edition D&D campaign there called Court of Swords. So I'm real busy. I do a lot of game mastering and thinking about game mastering. I've got a GM advice show on my channel called Office Hours. We did our 25th episode today, and it's like a call-in show. Folks submit their GMing questions, and I answer them on stream. So, yeah, I'm kind of sitting at the crux of like game design, GMing, and this weird streaming thing that people are doing with D&D now.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a lot of, like, a full schedule, but also a lot of, I guess you get a lot of kind of practice in. Do you sort of, like, because you run so much, do you find that you get a chance to sort of test out a lot of ideas and kind of, test drive new things that you want to try and see how they work? Or because you're kind of DMing, and this is actually something that interests me, because you're sort of always DMing for kind of a larger audience, do you find yourself almost beholden to kind of keep things a little bit safer?
I mean, I wouldn't say that it's safer necessarily, but like there's definitely a difference between GMing at a table with a group of people and GMing with an audience, right? Mm-hmm. Like most GMs don't play with several thousand people watching them and giving their very aggressive feedback. So, I mean, I think as with anything, like if you do something a lot, as long as you're not just coasting, as long as you're trying to like improve your craft, you do something a lot, you're going to get better at it. Like I'm a better GM now than I was 2 years ago because I GM so goddamn much now. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that there's a bit of an evolutionary thing there where you become better at the things you do, and I'm becoming pretty good at being a tabletop GM that uses a virtual tabletop for an audience on Twitch, right? Because that's really the only role playing that I do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm getting a lot of practice doing that, and it's for me very much like a branch off of all the kind of pre-existing GM skills that I've built up over the years. And so, I tell people this a lot, that we're fundamentally kind of in weird territory because we're playing games that weren't designed for an audience. We're playing them, and it's affecting our role as players. It's affecting our work as GMs, and it's drifting the game, right? We're playing slightly altered versions of the games that we're already used to. So
yeah, it's actually
it's
actually.
I was just gonna say it's a strange place to be in. We don't see that in a lot of tabletop, right? Like design still hasn't caught up to that space yet.
Yeah.
Right. Like there aren't any games that have been made for that universe. But game designers are a stolid folk. We'll catch up eventually.
That's actually I want to say, like, it's something I've talked about with quite a few people, because I hang out with a lot, being that I am primarily also now a Twitch DM. Like, that's where I do almost all of my playing and my gaming these days. All of my gaming these days is on Roll20. Like, so I talk a lot with people about what kind of muscles and exercises and what kind of skills and things you learn about running a game for, not just to entertain this group of people, but also to entertain this group of 4 or 5 people at your table, but also at the same time entertain however many people are going to tune in and watch you, and then hopefully run a game in a way that keeps those people engaged and coming back for more, right? Like, I think as a DM, it's always, I don't want to say always, but it's pretty easy for us to keep a group of like 4 or 5 people engaged and coming back for more of a campaign.
Oh man, I mean, I would love it if even that were the case. Like, I think it's hard. I think it's really fucking hard to keep people engaged in playing a role-playing game. I think that, like, having an audience and making it accountable in a way that is part of a person's job already. Like, for me, when I play with streamers, they are the best at scheduling. They don't fuck off right before a session. Like, they show up because they know how to, like, broadcast on time. They've already held themselves to a self-inflicted schedule. And for me, those people are the people that represent, right? They're the ones that show up and are ready to play on game day. Playing at a table with people who are like really busy with their own lives, don't involve role-playing games, that I find much harder to keep people focused and to be like, look, I really care about this campaign. I would love for all of you to give as much of a shit about this, but because they have kind of less direct involvement or direct engagement in it, they're not bringing fans with them, right? Like, that's a thing that I think if you're playing with people who have their own existing audience, they're not just showing up for you. They're not showing up for you or the group or the show at large. They're showing up for their own people who they've brought with them, promising like a good time. Like, if I'm on another show, I know that I got to bring my A game because the math squad's going to be there, and I want them to see me doing a good job, right? Like, we have these kind of fractal audiences that are made up of many sub audiences, and when people bring their own folks to the table, I find they tend to engage maybe harder than they would if it was just 4 or 5 people in somebody's basement playing a role-playing game. It'd be cool to get that level of dedication, but it's real tricky.
Yeah, I actually these, like, right now my schedule is I have a game on Fridays that I've been playing with this same group for like 3 years now on Roll20, and they're great guys, and we've kind of got to that point where it's like we've had to miss a couple weeks, mostly because of sickness. It's getting into fall, people get sick and this and that, and so we kind of don't mind if we have to miss a week or something, but when we started, and especially like whenever I start a new campaign, I find I'm the biggest stickler for like attendance and all that, which is why when I started doing the stream thing, exactly what you said, it's like getting the rest of the people to like care as much about being there on time and working. It was a whole new milieu, I think.
I feel like you get buy-in when you start a campaign and you're like, look, we're all gonna agree that we're gonna play every week on this day, and like obviously real life comes up, but like once you get to that point where there are people in your group, like everybody's missing a session once in a while, and like you haven't played in 2 or 3 weeks, I think it's important to just like sit down and be like, look, assholes, like
Yeah.
we're gonna play or we're not gonna play, right? And like making it a performance holds us accountable to 10 or 12,000 people who are like, no, we actually give a shit about this. We want to like tune in, and it's much harder to be like, look, I work late and I gotta, So I think you can do that at the table, but it's just that the only real ramifications for breaking that part of the social contract, for not showing up, is like, oh, my D&D group's gonna get mad at me. Like it's easier to brush off.
Yeah, it was actually when I started on Roll20. I played on Roll20 a lot for a long time before I started Twitch at all. Actually, I kind of started Twitch from a Roll20 group that I was just looking to run a new campaign, and if you've been on the site, it's created such a culture of people who like join or like sign up for games and then like just don't even show up, or like they're happy to just kind of leave like whenever they feel like it. It's a weird thing because and I talked about this a couple times, like this sort of digital age of gaming is so different from like when we were kids just playing around a table, because it's like if someone didn't show up or if someone had a bad time at the table, it's like you could go down the street and knock on his door and be like, hey dude, like we're playing D&D now, come, you got to get over here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to be careful with that kind of like vibe or like attitude about it, because it's very dangerously close to like these millennials and their computers. They're ruining.
Oh no, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's weird and different. Like for older people like me.
People saying they want to sign up for a game and they want to play a game and then not showing up. That's unequivocally like that's bullshit behavior.
Yeah.
I think playing role-playing games with strangers is like, I don't want to say it's impossible to do well, but like you kind of have to go in knowing like I don't know these people, they don't know me. The amount of like emotional energy they're committing to this game is like nil.
Yeah.
Until we can all kind of get to know each other, which is why I think like one shots are like a safe place to start, right? Like you run a one shot with a group and you're like, cool. Some of you were fun to play with, some of you not so much. People that were fun, I'm going to invite you to do another one shot with some other people, and we're going to like kind of weed this group out and prune the garden till we have like a group of people we want to play with. I often think too that like accessing tabletop through another venue is a really successful means of doing this. Like if you have another community that you belong to that has like nerds in it, like a Twitch community or like a fandom or something where you know these people by means of like their forum posts or whatever, you can probe that space to be like, hey, so I know we're all fans of whatever, Lord of the Rings. Does anybody like role-playing games? Because I'd love to play some D&D. Here's what I'm thinking. Maybe, and you've got some context for those people. It can be really hard when you're like, I am randomly just going to like draw in a bunch of people I don't know and see if they will be good to play role-playing games with. It's like speed dating. Like it's in theory, maybe, but like, people are garbage mostly, so it's hard to like navigate that space.
I did that on Roll20, just the picking up randoms and kind of creating groups for like I think like 2 years or so, and it was because I wanted to play, and I was just trying to find the right group, and it was like it's weird when you've been doing it long enough that you can actually get the process of screening applicants down to like a science. Like that's a weird place to be in. But
it's fine. You can do the pug thing and it can be okay, but it's a roll of the dice, right? It's random chance whether it's going to be worth doing or not.
Yeah, that's why I'm so lucky that I found like I've been playing with the group I have, because they let me indulge my ridiculous DM fantasies of like taking as long as I want to tell a story, and like my hidden roles and all that good stuff. Like because I don't know if you've ever done it. I'm totally like, I used to be a pretty kind of crunch heavy like keep track of everything kind of DM, and then at some point I'm just like, man, this is going by too fast. I just want to take my time and just tell a story, like take as long as it needs.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't I don't think anybody at the table, like, I don't think GMs tell stories, right? I don't think story is like a thing that you do to your players. I think story emerges from play. Story is the byproduct of the fiction you're creating at the table. Um, and like I think as far as prep and stuff goes, like, and being detailed and dealing with crunch and stuff, like, it depends on the game, right? Like, you play the games by the rules that are written, and sometimes games demand a lot of like attention to detail, and some games don't give a shit, right? Like, so it can really vary the more you explore like different games. I think if you have one style, anybody has one style of GMing, and doesn't like bend that around the rules of the games they're playing, they're missing out, because games are engineered to be played a real specific way. Obviously, the table and its sort of social conventions will override and interact with that. That's not a non thing.
Mm-hmm.
But from a GMing perspective, yeah, like I kind of let the game do its job.
That's actually what I wanted to ask, because again, I know Dungeon World, like I have the book, I've read it, I've never had a chance to run it or play in it because I just don't have that much time to tack on campaigns, but I know enough about the system that I know kind of where it's coming from. But I was interested in asking you sort of where you were coming from when you were writing something like that, because to me, I think maybe at first it seemed a little bit like it was written almost as a sort of a little bit of a disenfranchisement with like D&D.
So this is funny, because when we released Dungeon World, we got a lot of feedback from predominantly like OSR folks who were like, why do you hate Dungeons and Dragons? Why do you have this problem with D&D? Like, you obviously like are just trying to like take the piss out of D&D. And for us, like, Dungeon World is a real like statement of love for Dungeons and Dragons, not just as a genre, but like the game and all the cultural weight that its bullshit carries, right? Like, it's a love letter to things like hit points and classes and wizards and elves and stuff, in that we wanted the game to feel at the table like we remembered D&D feeling before we got all like obsessed with like rules and shit. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say that Dungeon World doesn't have rules, or the rules don't matter in Dungeon World, because they matter intensely, but they're rules engaging a specific kind of fiction that feels a little bit more freewheeling than we usually get out of very like intricate moment to moment measurements of light and time in the dungeon and like all of that stuff. And I love that part of D&D. Like, my other favorite D&D besides Dungeon World is Moldvay basic D&D from 83, right? And that game is all about that shit. It's all about, slogging through the dungeon and making sure you got enough torchlight and getting random encounters and doing the D&D thing. So, I think that Dungeons and Dragons has, ever since the very beginning of its inception, has been this unfolding blossom of game culture, in that, there's never been one true version of D&D. There are hundreds of D&Ds. And when we made Dungeon World, we just wanted to make a petal of that beautiful flower, but to be distinct from all other forms of Dungeons and Dragons, while still kind of overlapping some of the stuff that they did. The world didn't need another Swords and Wizardry or another Castles and Crusades. We didn't need another retro clone. We wanted to make something that felt new, but maintained the same sort of broad strokes and palette of Dungeons and Dragons, that could be visible on the shelf as like, this is a D&D game, we can tell. So it's interesting, because it's a love letter to D&D, but I think it's sometimes written in a language that people don't know how to read. They see it as a threat to that space rather than an alternate view into it.
Well, I think a little bit of that possibly comes because Dungeon World places a lot of emphasis on interaction between characters and stuff like that, and things that aren't necessarily mechanical advancements that Dungeons and Dragons does. And I know a lot of people who saw this book and they're like, this is story game, like it's.
I mean, I think a lot of the people that have that complaint didn't read Dungeon World or have never played it, right? Like, there's mechanical incentive in the game to make up D&D narratives together, to go on adventures and fight monsters and do Dungeons and Dragons shit, in a way that even I think current versions of D&D don't necessarily incentivize.
Well, that's it, yeah.
And I think that it's not even about, like, there's very few mechanical things in Dungeon World for like bullshit role playing. Like your alignment can lead you to role playing. The parlay move, the only social move in the game, doesn't work on other PCs. So there isn't, and this is the thing, is like, I think that people look at it, they look at the fact that it's based on Apocalypse World, they have this understanding of what they think small press role playing games are like.
Yeah.
And that can be frightening. That can be tricky for people to get their head around. And people, humans generally, but nerds especially, react very strongly to things that they don't understand or don't feel comfortable with. They push back really hard.
Yeah, I have.
So I think there is some of that, but overall, like, just to kind of like, you know, be clear about it, I think that D&D fans and small press hippie story game fans, the whole gamut, like, we've had a lot of really positive response from like most people, I think, that play Dungeon World. It's definitely a bit of a paradigm twist for a lot of people, and we've kind of hidden that weirdness in a familiar shell, so people can come to it expecting certain things from this version of D&D style fiction, and they can get different things, and that can feel confusing or upsetting for them.
Yeah, my I have a friend. You may have seen it possibly passed around on Twitter. But he's making a system right now. I think they're just getting ready to do their Kickstarter like next week. But he was creating a system, and it was sort of like based on the whole D20 thing. We talked. I don't remember exactly why he specifically chose to stick to the D20 thing. Possibly just as a legacy thing, so like people who know D&D can like not feel like they're transitioning to something overly weird, or kind of like, oh, this game uses D12s because who does that? But I think he's kind of dealt with the same thing, which is, you know, you're packaging a thing that is trying to fill the role that D&D does, and that is trying to provide a role-playing game that you want people to choose, but it looks on the surface very, very different, and you have to kind of convince people to sort of give it a try, rather than just kind of take a glance and be like, oh yeah, that's cool, but it's too weird for me.
Yeah, I mean, the mechanisms are the game. Everything else is not important when it really comes down to it, right? Like the art and the text and the layout and stuff, they're all cool and very helpful in conveying what the game is like or about, but the mechanisms are what matter. And if you make a game using like the OGL, it's gonna feel like D&D because those are the mechanisms, and that's just what's gonna happen. I think people underestimate, and still, like, it boggles my mind that this is even still true about tabletop role-playing games at all, but some people don't think the system you play matters. I still hear people say that you can just play whatever game with whatever kind of system you want, because, I don't know, like, they believed that lie that they were told by game designers at some point in the distant past, and now they think that, like, well, I'm just going to make a game with whatever system I think people will buy. And it doesn't matter. I can make a space story, or I can make a pulp story, or I can make a romance story using D20. Like, I worked at a game store during the great and terrible D20 glut when every game tried to use the OGL, because it's much, and I say this like from experience as a designer, it's much harder to write your own system than it is to use someone else's to make a similar game. Like Dungeon World, we used Apocalypse World because it filled a certain role in the space that we wanted to use. But everyone was doing that during this big D20 glut, and we were getting all these games that were incredibly badly matched to the system, and they were being sold to us as, well, you already know D20, now you can play Call of Cthulhu, now you can play Big Eyes Small Mouth, now you can play 1,600 different variations of D&D. I mean, Monty Cook did a World of Darkness game using the D20 system. So there's all of this crust built up around the idea that you can play anything with any system, and we really need to like shed that as fast as possible, because games should use systems that create the kind of fiction that the designer intends for that game. And if you want to make a game that feels like D&D, that has this Chaos Plateau vibe, that uses a D20 so you have really swingy results, use that system, use the OGL for sure. But you know, I think that designers come at games from a lot of different places, and it's not always about thinking about the mechanisms, because again, we've been taught otherwise.
That's actually kind of interesting. I want to delve in. Oh, people are saying that the stream is buffering. I don't know what that is. I will see if I can adjust it if I can do anything about it on my end. Hold on, let me see. Let me ask.
Hmm?
I don't know. People, I'm looking in chat and people are saying it's the stream's buffering, so I'm trying to see if I can do anything about that.
Sure.
But I guess while that's going on, so I want to I wanted to delve into that a little bit because I had talked about this a little bit with Steve Lumpkin because he's, you know, when we sat down, he's huge into like game design philosophy and theory and all that, you know, all that jazz.
Sure.
Probably on a level that I am not. Like he kind of thinks about those things on a level that I wasn't really prepared to come at them on, which is great because I love being exposed to like opinions and points of view like those. But we were talking about something, and I was talking specifically about the fact that I wanted to do a dungeon crawl game, like a really, really big dungeon crawl specifically for the stream,
Sure.
like maybe a mega dungeon or something. However, I know just because I've run them before, like I know inherently that dungeon crawls don't play that well as entertainment for like an audience because they tend to be very, very slow and very, very, you know, plotting and the rules of D&D aren't meant to like make a dungeon crawl fast-paced and exciting most of the time, you know. And so we talked a little bit about that, but that's actually what I wanted to bring up is what if you're saying, okay, this is an idea that we want to try and not use like a D&D system for, like, where, being a game designer, where do you think the mechanics should start being built for something like that?
Well, you're talking about how to run a dungeon crawl with a system that isn't D&D?
So essentially, like, what I had liked to do, or at least wanted to know where to start, was how to take a normal dungeon crawl, but have the system be one that kind of keeps things exciting, both, you know, for the players and stuff. Like the system allows for that sort of tension and excitement, rather than a lot of skill checks and stuff.
I think the thing is you're looking at a fundamental but clash there, where you're looking at something like a mega dungeon, mm-hmm. which is, as you said, like periods of tension, but mostly tedium, right?
Yeah.
Like it's meant to be very slow. It's meant to be very methodical. They're designed that way. We've associated them with Dungeons and Dragons as a thing, so we assume that that's kind of way that we're supposed to play that game. And I think you can make it work as a game if you're playing a version of D&D like Moldvay Basic that is about dungeon crawling. But making that entertaining, making that fun to watch, is a much bigger challenge.
Yeah.
Because again, D&D wasn't written for that shit. D&D doesn't care if it's fun to watch. So you have to find ways to make that entertaining, but still play a game that's engaging for the players. And I don't think that if the people watching the show don't care about the mechanics, if they're not as interested in the like slow grind of time, when you roll random encounters, the players doing the mapping, if the people watching the show don't care about that stuff, you got to play a different game. You got to do a different thing.
Yeah.
Because that's what dungeon crawling is kind of about. It can be fun to do that, but again, your audience has to buy into the idea. Like we ran Keep on the Borderlands, and I had a great time. The audience was super into it, but it was fun, and it was fun for me because I like Moldvay. But it was good because the people watching it gave a shit about the mechanics. And that's harder to come by, right? Like those people were watching because they wanted to learn how to use Roll20 to do their own dungeon crawls in that style. So they were invested in the mechanical layer. But, you know, your audience might not necessarily like that. They might be like, why is this going so slowly? Why is this happening? I don't care about this. In which case you've got a dissonance not between the game and the players, but you've got a dissonance between the audience and the show. And roleplay as a show, role-playing games as a module of entertainment are very different than role-playing games you're just playing for their own sake. Like for me, I prefer shows that lean on the mechanics and that care about the mechanics, right? I love Torchbearer. I love watching people play Torchbearer. I like D&D done in the classical mold because I care about those mechanics. I want to see that stuff happen. I want to see the players butt heads with the system. But I also acknowledge that most people are not as designy as I am, and so are like, no, I just want to see people do funny voices and like go on adventures and stuff. And a mega dungeon is not it's not the channel for that. I think it's not the maybe the right venue. Again, it depends. It's about knowing your audience, right?
Yeah, that's actually that's kind of where it was one of those things, 'cause I'm an old school kind of DM in the sense that like I love dungeon crawls. I love like deadly traps and complex puzzles and things that the players kind of have to suss out for themselves. Like I love when I was with Steve, we were talking about how a great dungeon was something like Tomb of Horrors or other dungeons in those veins go about.
I'm gonna stop you right there. You're never allowed to use the phrase "great dungeon" and "Tomb of Horrors" in the same sentence.
I know I'm the only one that thinks that.
No, Tomb of Horrors is just like a never-ending, unceasing stream of bullshit. And
it is.
It's badly designed, and it's not fun to play, and it's not fun to watch.
It may
like,
not.
I agree you can.
No. I'm with you.
But
Trust me,
bad.
I'm with you. It may not be fun to play, and I know it's probably not fun to watch. My only contention as to why it's good is because it teaches the players all of the rules about its design right up front, and the way certain things are laid out for DMs are like a masterclass in how to properly design traps to fuck with your.
I feel like.
But you're right.
I think that's the thing, right? Like I think fucking with your players in the way that Tomb of Horrors does it is not. It's not a way that anyone should GM, right? Because it's all gotchas. It's all like, oh, you didn't do the one tiny thing that you should have done to get through this puzzle, so fuck you, you die.
Yeah.
Like it's super high stakes, and it's emblematic of Gygax's like adversarial kind of curmudgeonly GM player relationship. And I think you can challenge your players, and you can be that kind of underhanded about GMing, but I think that Tomb of Horrors as a module violates a lot of like the social layer stuff. It's like not designed to be entertaining, and it's designed to be mean. It's a mean joke.
I'm not arguing that. I'm actually with you there. And I think Steve put this really well, was that while like the Tomb of Horrors does all those things, it does teach the players all of the rules about how to kind of go about solving its the problem is the rules that it's built on and the rules that it teaches the players are the least fun rules to play by, because they're the ones that sort of force the players to go slow and plotting and check every square with everything, and that that in itself is what makes it as an experience like if you had written the same concept, like a really dangerous dungeon, but based on rules that are much more interesting and much more engaging to the players, then you would probably have a massively superior experience.
I mean, I feel like Tomb of Horrors doesn't really like teach the players anything. It just teaches them not to trust the game, and it teaches them not to trust the GM, right? It's a series of slaps in the face, because you got the answer wrong, but you didn't have the tools to like know the answer in the first place. I don't know. It feels really mean-spirited, and it's one of those things that I think people put on a pedestal because they're like, oh, Tomb of Horrors, it's like the world's deadliest dungeon and stuff. Yeah. But really, it's like one person has all the information, a bunch of people have none, and the person with the information is just hitting you in the face over and over, being like, idiot, you didn't know the answer because I didn't tell you.
That's the thing, is that's never how I've actually run it. Like I it may just be because as a DM, like I ran it very differently than that. But also, again, trust me, I don't deny that it's like it's weird. It's got weird kind of social aspects to it. I just think like as a from a DM perspective, like when I read it, there were a lot of things in it that I was really realizing were like, these things are very well designed. They just need to be designed. But they're only designed well from the DM side. They're not designed from both sides. Is I think the major problem. But again, trust me, I don't put it on a pedestal or anything. I just praise it because of that one particular thing. Because as a dungeon, I think it's got some really interesting ideas. But yeah, but we were talking specifically about that, and that was what we were talking about, which was, when you're kind of creating a dungeon or creating something for the players to go in, you have to kind of do it in, you know, give them a set of rules to learn that, like, encourage interesting exploration and behavior, not like move 5 feet, check a square, move 5 feet, check a square. Like, you have to find a way to sort of encourage them to do interesting things.
Well, players will do what they're rewarded to do, right? Whether rewarded with continued health and well-being for their characters, or whether they're rewarded with experience or gold, right? Like, players don't inherently engage with any part of a campaign or game without being rewarded for it. And I think that, you know, you're talking about that, you know, move and check thing. Like, that's a part of old school play that is built into it for a reason, because the behavior there that is learned is prudence. It's make sure you check, because things are not always the way that they seem, and the game is designed to be played methodically, right? Like, that's a part of the game. That's not misplaying. That's just how that form of D&D was designed to be. And it's interesting watching that kind of spin out of control into things like Tomb of Horrors, where Tomb of Horrors, I think, is a reaction to the people that Gary Gygax had learned to play D&D with, had a long time to learn to play his style of D&D, and he was mad that he wasn't able to trick them anymore, so he made this bullshit dungeon that was like a fuck you to all the things they had learned by playing D&D correctly. So I think it's one of those things where D&D relies on not just character skill but player skill, and that idea of bringing, you know, enough torches or checking the floor or hammering spikes into a door in case it swings closed automatically. These are things that players learn, and they pass that knowledge from character to character as they get better at Dungeons and Dragons. And I think that, again, like, adventures and campaigns and GM structured stuff that rewards what your players have learned as players is really valuable in this sort of OSR kind of old school dungeon crawl like space, because you kind of take a step back from, well, your character only has 5 intelligence, and you can say, you as a player have learned how to dungeon crawl, and it doesn't matter that you're playing a fighter now and you're a wizard before. You know more about D&D than you used to, so I'm going to design around that knowledge. And that stuff gets passed on to new players, but you know, you can carry it from game to game as you learn. And I think that rewarding people for learning that stuff is really really useful, really valuable. You want to look at the things that D&D has taught your players and be able to encourage that continued behavior.
Yeah, no, I was just reading some chat, and like I said, I'm kind of aware that you know, it's one of the only I'm one of the only people that kind of, I think like, I remember I read the here's what I think the my final point on that is, I read a John Wick article, which I'm sure you are familiar with, where he basically lambasted the Tomb of Horrors as a dungeon, and I read it, and it was basically criticizing it for the same thing everyone else did, and my only thought was like, yeah, all that makes sense in 1979, right? Like, when it was written, but it's not then now. Like, everyone knows about it, everyone knows the legend, everyone knows the stories behind it, so it's like, I don't think these days it kind of has, I don't think it's it merits the same criticism, because it's one of those things where it's like, everyone knows that Sharknado is a horrible movie. No one goes into that expecting a good movie, right? You know? I
mean, it's different though, because Tomb of Horrors isn't like campy in the way that Sharknado is. Like, you can have fun watching a bad movie, but like Tomb of Horrors is like an exercise in cruelty, right? Like Sharknado is not going to like take your wallet and throw it in the sewer and then punch you in the mouth and then break your car window, right? It's just a bad movie. I'm not saying, like, people have fun playing bad games. They have fun playing bad adventures in good games. They have fun playing bad adventures in bad games. Like, you can have fun doing bullshit things. Yeah. I just think that, you know, John Wick and I, you know, we disagree on a lot of stuff, but we don't disagree on the reasons, I think, why Tomb of Horrors is a poor example of an adventure.
Yeah, I think it may have been the way I was brought up. Like, I don't know. I think we all learned D&D in, you know, from different things, and that was one of the things I played when I was very, very young, and it's like it stuck with me. So I wanted to talk a little bit about no, that's something I wrote from last time. Okay, yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about when it comes to actually, because we were talking a little bit about mechanics, specifically, what the game systems and stuff encourages, both from the players, and how you interact with the system and the campaign and stuff. So do you think there's, like, when you were kind of writing your own system, and when you've been kind of running games since then, do you think there's anything you kind of, like, you learned from this whole process, things that you think, like, you would probably want to try to do differently if you had to rewrite all this, like your Dungeon World system or anything, or the way you kind of DM things, or have you learned things that work, like, incredibly well? Because I will say for myself, I learned from Dungeon World, actually, though. I don't know, it may have been from Dungeon World and a couple other things, but those whole character kind of bonds and, the character interaction stuff, I've sort of used a lot in my D&D games to great effect.
I mean, that stuff works because it's non-optional, right? Like, D&D asks you to think about how your characters are related to one another. It asks you to act as a team. It asks you to work together as an adventuring party, but it never incentivizes that in any way whatsoever, right? There's nothing in the game that says that you will be rewarded if you behave this way. And bonds in Dungeon World and their predecessors, Hex in Apocalypse World, things like beliefs in Burning Wheel, these are mechanical things. They're a part of the game. And I think it's cool that people are seeing that in Dungeon World and repurposing it for their other games, because I think that that's a thing that a lot of games aren't willing to incentivize or mechanize. So it's really cool to hear that stuff gets moved around. It's the same with the, like, GM tools, right? Like, we really liked fronts in Apocalypse World. We modified them for Dungeon World. I've seen some other things that use similar systems. It all comes from Dogs in the Vineyards, like town building GM stuff. But I think those tools, again, are a place that people as designers are often scared to say, no, you have to do this. This is how you prepare for this game. These are the things that you do. And if you do these things, you will be ready to continue role-playing in this system. And I mean, to speak to the idea of, like, did we learn anything, making Dungeon World and in the subsequent time. I mean, I feel like if we hadn't learned anything making Dungeon World, and I hadn't learned anything about game design since then, I feel like there might be something wrong with my brain, because I think just the process of making a game teaches you so much about games. Because to be able to make a game, even a game that's fundamentally a hack of an existing game, you have to understand that game and your intentions really strongly. You have to know what you're doing, you have to know what games are about, and you have to be willing to experiment, because that's all a game design is, right? It's this idea that there's something missing, or there's something I want to see in gaming, whether it's a type of game or an alternate take on something that already exists, whether I'm trying to fix what I perceive to be a problem in a particular game by designing a new game. You're attempting to make something to solve a situation that doesn't feel quite right for you. And you're hypothesizing about how you can do that, right? So, Sage and I were, like, not enjoying the D&D we were playing, and we were feeling weird about the amount of rules that we were dealing with. And so what we did was we designed a game that allowed us to test some hypotheses, to be like, would it be more fun if this? Would it be more fun if we use the Apocalypse engine? Would it be more fun if we incentivize the characters' bonds between each other? And some of those hypotheses were like, yep, this is more entertaining for us. This is a design that works and fulfills that gap. And some things we left by the wayside, right? Some things just didn't play out. Game design is a series of experiments that lead up to a game that's your positing hypothesis. This game will do this thing well because we've done these things to mechanize those behaviors at the table. And and I think that's the real process about learning in game design as you build a game. And then, of course, watching people play it, like turning it over to the world at large, you end up being able to see people use that system, use those things, and test your hypothesis in a way that maybe you wouldn't have been able to, even with playtesting, been able to figure out as a case in that game. So yeah, I mean, we've learned lots, not just about Dungeon World and what it could be in the future, but about design and about how to better understand other role-playing games. I understand all the games that I play now better because of all the time I spent working on Dungeon World and learning games that are related to or peripheral to it.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I'm obviously I haven't actually. I've never really been a game designer, but you know, I understand definitely where you're coming from, because I started reading a lot of systems, and just like I started watching and listening to a lot of other DMs, mostly to find. Because I was trying to look for ways that I could sort of improve the way I do things, because coming from an art background, I've always been pretty big on like self-critique. You know, it's always you end
Sure.
every session like, ah man, like that was horrible, like I could do all of this better, like next time I'm going to do this better. And I don't remember exactly where I found it, but there was someone that I saw had a thing that they did when they DM'd, where the players sort of helped. They created NPCs and stuff, connections that their character had in the world, as a way of kind of defining their connection to the setting around them. And that's always been really big for me, is like whenever I sit down and I do character creation with my players, like I want to make them as informed and as invested in the setting that they're playing in as possible, because that way when we start at session 1, like they don't have to turn to me and be like, hey, what do I know about this? It's like I want them to be there and present, and also caring about that stuff. So I had them do that kind of NPC creation stuff, worked amazingly, and then we sort of started getting into like character bonds and building stuff like that every couple levels, going back and addressing character arcs and stuff, and it's all been it's all been a huge increase in, I think, the quality of the feedback that I have with my players.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that's totally like a normal thing, and it's becoming more and more normal as people pick up on alternate means of GMing. They play different games. I think you can go a step further too, right? Because I think that we have this model where, as GMs, we come to the table and we say, I have this campaign world. I've spent X amount of hours obsessing over it and coming up with details and figuring out weather patterns and whatever, and then I need to impart that information to you. Right? So you can say, I need you to make up an NPC, but here's the framework that NPC has to exist in, right? You can't just be like, yeah, he's a cleric of, the god of darkness. And you're like, well, actually, there's no god of darkness in the setting. And like, you can give up even more of that by saying, I have a general idea of what the kind of campaign I want to run and the sorts of stuff I want in the world, right? Like you can say, I'm interested in a world that we take inspiration from like ancient Cambodia, and I want to incorporate the tarot into the game as a fortune-telling mechanism, but I don't really have super detailed ideas about what the cultures or civilizations of this world are like. I haven't really detailed like the structure of society. Why don't you just make some shit up about your character, and I will spin out from there. I'll posit from that information what it might be like. So if a character is like, oh, I'm an elf, you're like, cool, I don't know shit about elves. You can tell me, like, where did your character come from? What are elves like in this setting? Like, let them extrapolate that out. And I think at the heart of Dungeon World, that's what makes it a game that feels like it's got so much player input, because on the extreme end, the way I tend to run it, on the extreme end, you can come to the table with nothing and end up with a campaign setting after the first hour or 2 hours or X number of sessions, just by building up these little blocks as you go. Because I think that buy-in is what makes people give a shit about the game, the campaign itself, right? And buy-in comes from wanting to play the game as it's written, right? Wanting to play the mechanisms. It comes from caring about the world, and it comes from caring about your character. And you can build all that stuff around the idea that when people create, they're bought into the thing they're creating. So you can say, you can make up the kingdom you're from. I don't care about that. Whatever, you're from there. We'll put that in the game. And when they do that, they are instantly a part of that setting, which can be much harder when you're playing a game that comes with a pre-built setting, or you've done that work as a GM, because then you run into the situation where you're like, let me read you 14 pages of setting before we start this campaign. Page the first.
See, I actually, because I do run a lot of published settings. Actually, in my 3-year group, we play Pathfinder, and we play in the Golarian setting, which is the one that they've published the 1.5 million books about. And what that's actually decent for is, like when we started a campaign, like I can literally just say, like, here we started Curse of the Crimson Throne, which is a campaign that takes place entirely within one city, right?
Yeah.
And in order to make them, now, goal number one when you're starting a campaign like that is, okay, I need to make sure these players care extremely deeply about this city and their place within it, because if they don't, as soon as stuff starts going south, they're gonna be like, why are we still here? We could just leave. And then you've lost you've lost the concept. But
that's the risk of playing any pre-gen adventure, right? Is that, like, you have to get that buy-in to be like, y'all need to care enough to follow this adventure through, or we can't play, because people will just be like, I don't. Yeah. Cool, the town's being attacked by zombies. There are other towns. Let's get the fuck out of here.
Which is why, like, when I was able to sort of take the book, like, there's a book about Korvosa, just this whole city, and I say, here's the book. I don't need you to read it. I don't need to read the whole thing. Just flip through it and find a part that interests you, right? Just pick something in there that is interesting to you. Maybe it's the Church of Pharasma. Maybe it's the Thieves Guild that is legally sanctioned to go, like, knock over businesses that don't pay their protection. Like, pick something in there that interests you, and then we'll build on it. Like, we'll create your lore about this, and we'll find a place for you. I would probably never sit down and, like, read to a player the setting stuff, but I love having that stuff to give to them so they can, because when I give a player a book about a setting book or something, I like seeing where they gravitate to, because that, to me as a DM, it tells me, okay, these are the things that I'll need to play up in the campaign. These are the things that they're interested in.
I think it's tough, because in a lot of cases you end up with players who can barely be bothered to, like, learn the rules of the game, and if you give them, like, here's a 100-page source book about the setting, like, flip through it and find something, they're just going to be like, garbage can, like, thanks, but I don't have time. I can barely be bothered to think about the game when I'm not at the table. So it can be tricky. You've really got to play with the right group for that kind of thing. You got to be like, everybody's got to give a shit about Golarian. You see this in licensed games when you take a step even back from, like, I think the hardest thing to do is get someone invested in a D&D campaign setting, because it's not connected to anything else that they give a shit about, right? Like with Star Wars, like we played Age of Rebellion. That shit's easy. I'm like, I don't know, you like Star Wars? What kind of Star Wars shit you like? You want to be a droid? Cool, you know what a droid is. It's easy because we have this cultural background for this stuff. But with the campaign setting that only exists for fans of that role-playing game or its related NERPs, you end up in a situation where either they're already fans, in which case, cool, go for it, you got that buy-in to begin with, or they're like, oh, I have to read literally anything beside the player's handbook. Can I be a dwarf? Cool, what are dwarfs like? You know, and then it front loads all that work onto the GM to be like, well, actually, you know, you wouldn't say that to him because you're a dwarf, and you wouldn't, like, you relate differently to this person because they're an elf, and elves and dwarves in this setting. And so, you know, as a player, that can be really hard when your GM tells you, you know, you wouldn't do that. Your character is a part of this culture, and you wouldn't know that. So again, you gotta buy in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever been in a position to be like, stop a player and be like, all right, no, that's just, let me tell you what you'd say. But it's, but obviously you're right. It is, a possibility, but I think, and that's actually the thing that I've kind of learned over the years is that, like, almost any problem that you're having with players in a game can be solved by playing with the right group. Like, it takes a while to find those people, but it's like, if you want to play in Golarion or you want to play an adventure path, you need to find a group that wants to do that. You don't just take your normal group of players and be like, this time we're playing a published adventure. And they're like, I don't know what that means. And then then you have to explain to them, okay, well, you can't go here and you can't do, like, obviously, if you don't just drop that on a group who doesn't know about it.
I think the thing is, though, is that, like, Pathfinder is not doing you any good here. Like, the system's not helping.
I am perfectly aware of its flaws.
Oh no, but it's not about. This isn't the thing. It's not about Pathfinder being too complicated. It's not about Pathfinder focusing on combat. Like, none of those are around this setting problem. The problem is the setting and the material is super disconnected. Like the material is irrelevant to the setting. In that the game doesn't give you any tools. Like the flip side of this, the compare and contrast, is Pendragon, right? It's King Arthur Pendragon, and that has rules where if you don't act like an Arthurian knight, you're not playing the game right. You're breaking the rules. So the mechanics say you can't fuck this up because we're not going to let you. You're going to play by the rules, and you're going to be a good knight. And the game is going to be about that struggle of like playing a knight. So it's hard when games like D&D or games like Pathfinder try to instill settingness without mechanically building that setting in. Like if D&D really wanted to embrace Forgotten Realms as its setting, it would redesign all the classes, and it wouldn't be fighters and wizards and rogues. They would be setting-specific stuff with setting-specific behaviors built into them. And it would say, like, if you're a Knight of Cormyr, you are not allowed to you cannot use this ability on another citizen of Cormyr, right? Like, you deal 0 damage if you try to use this on them. And it would build that stuff into the mechanisms of the game. But again, like with Pathfinder, because it wants you to be able to build your own setting, it has to give up some of that and put some of that effort onto the players. In which case, like you said, you've limited your player group. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that it's cool to play a game and to be upfront about it and to say, like, look, you got to be a Galarian superfan to get into this game, and it's going to mean we're all going to have a really fun time playing by the rules of this setting we all know and care about. You know, in the same way that playing Star Wars with a bunch of Star Wars fans can be a really fun and rewarding experience over playing it with people who have only like seen one of the movies and don't really engage, right? Like I think, like you said, like picking the right group and being upfront about what the requirements for your game and what you want. Not as a GM saying like you're not allowed to join this group if this, but you can say it's my expectation that we all care about these things, and so you can get.
Oh no, you're absolutely right on all that. Actually, I was watching the show that you were DMing earlier, and it was really interesting seeing you do the tarot card things, because in the campaign that I'm running, actually 2 of them, the Harrow cards are a huge part of the setting. Like the entire, you had mentioned something about like the culture that they were all a part of was like totally into tarot card readings, and like the campaigns that the country of Varisia that both of my campaigns take place in right now, like the native population, they're sort of like a kind of gypsy-esque population, all completely like they're totally into tarot cards. And so like the party has a ghost with them that is like her spirit is inside this tarot card deck, and so she does readings for them all the time. It's something I have a ton of fun doing.
I'm so sick of role-playing settings using the like Roma, like they're like magic people. Like White Wolf did it. They did that horrible racist World of Darkness Gypsies thing. Ravenloft does it. Like as designers and as like setting creators, let's all just move away from that like in the future. Let's just put the Roma over there and let them be a real culture and not co-opt them for our D&D games. It's weird. It's so weird that they're just like lazily doing this. Like I get the design stuff that you were talking about, just like as a personal point of like interest. That stuff is so gross. I hate that. But
it's,
looking at
to me it's always just been like it's more of a to me the only distinction really is like when I'm playing someone who happens to be related to a native Varisian, I know what general accent I'm gonna do. That's pretty much all it is. Like, and I mean, they don't all dress the same. They don't all they don't live in the same houses. Like, not all of them are wandering people. It's just a long time ago, before this place got colonized by Cheliacs, they happened to be a more nomadic population.
I mean, there's totally nothing wrong with taking inspiration from like existing cultures for our campaign settings. I think there are ways to do it respectfully, and there are ways to do it that are like kind of bullshit. And varying degrees of success happen in varying role-playing and fantasy properties over time. It just seems like when people need a like kind of shady, mystical travel, they're like, oh, just put some Roma in here and we'll probably call them gypsies, like a bunch of jerks. And it's weird seeing that happen, but it's a clear thing.
In my game, they love Desna, and they're all like they're the nicest people. Like they're not like shady at all or anything like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not saying I'm with you.
To this setting, but the thing is, like, I was watching, and a couple people in chat were talking about like how, and you actually, I think you commented on it specifically about like how you just draw random cards and interpret them, and somehow it magically fits exactly what the players want to hear or need to hear, and people are like, oh my god, it's like I've done it like a dozen times now. I've done like impromptu tarot readings with this deck, and like every time the players have the same reaction, and it's like, that's awesome.
And I think the interesting thing from that particular bit was just reinforcing to the players, like, obviously this is just made up and we're like filling this information together, but that's what the whole game is. And like, your characters exist in a culture where this is normal. Whether you as a player want your character to be skeptical of that thing or not, that's fine, but this is the cultural baseline which we can as GMs establish. We can say like, this is the baseline from which all of the people in this culture derive, but nothing is monocultural, right? Everybody is different, and you're still, your players, your characters, and the NPCs all have a different approach to that culture. Just because something is prevalent in a culture doesn't mean that the PCs have to evince it necessarily, unless that's what the game is about, right? Unless the game is about struggling with your place in culture and the expected beliefs and behaviors, which is again what Pendragon kind of does.
Well, that's why it was interesting for me, because in my Crimson Throne game, none of the players were like native Varisians, so none of them really had a basis in Harrow reading. If they did, we would have talked about that before the game. So when they sort of started the game and they met this woman and she just started doing the reading, and every chapter since then she's done a reading for them, and it's always been like scarily accurate to like what they were going through and stuff. I don't know, it's just one of those things that I have learned to love in games, because once you sort of learn all the interpretations of the cards and stuff, you can have so much fun with it. It's such a fun little mechanic.
Tarot is just random tables, right? Like it's a thing that GMs do all the time, and it's about interpreting like the tip of the iceberg and looking at what it might mean in context for your campaign. It's a tool that I think is really useful, and I've used it in role-playing games before, but predominantly as a sort of GM inspiration tool, rather than like explicitly a part of the setting, which we're doing with Court of Swords.
Yeah, and actually that was one of the things I was going to ask him a little bit, but I do want to, since we're coming up on the top of the hour, I want to remind everyone you're watching the Fuzzy Dice Show, your DM show here on the Exploding Dice channel, and thank you to everyone who's been hanging out, everyone who's joined us with the follows and awesome hosts and all that stuff, and the great discussion in chat. You guys are being awesome. As we kind of roll on, we're going to start taking questions from you guys in chat, because I know you've been building up quite a few. If you do have something that we want that you want us to talk about, a topic to discuss, a question you want to answer, whether it be about D&D or Dungeon World or something that either of us DMs, or maybe you just want to ask weirdly personal questions, I mean, it's up to you. Go ahead and drop those in chat. You can either tag them with like a Q so I can see them, or you can just tag me in them at Exploding Dice, and that will help me see them a little bit better. So I wanted to scroll. I'm gonna scroll up and see, because I had one up top. I think that was about the Harrow cards though. And this, of course, program doesn't like me saying here. Albert Knocker said, have you ever tried an RPG system that's based primarily on tarot cards?
I feel like that such a thing must exist. I've never been exposed to one for whom that's the primary mechanism, but I feel like, given that people, when they try to like explore other avenues than dice, looking for randomness, they often go looking for other existing kind of random oracles, and so you see people looking at decks of cards. You see people looking at
Deadlands, right?
Yeah, Deadlands uses cards. I think Savage Worlds uses cards for some stuff too. And then like tarot has to be a thing, and I could see tarot fitting into all kinds of places. In Court of Swords, we're using tarot for aspects that replace sort of bonds in that we would use in Dungeon World. They're ways to tie the characters together, and I'm using it as a fictional space in terms of like the gods and some of that stuff. But that's just adapting it to D&D. I don't know that I can think of one that uses tarot like very explicitly, but definitely. There's definitely, I'm sure, unfinished designs or small press stuff that I haven't seen that exists.
I'm sure someone has written it. If not, if John Harper hasn't, I'm sure that's probably the next thing that he's working on. But Yeah, I'm like my mind instantly went to Deadlands with their card deck, but I've never seen anything based like where the sort of random aspect of games were based on tarot cards.
Yeah, didn't Everway use some kind of like weird
I don't.
expensive deck of cards?
I wouldn't know. I'm not familiar.
Yeah, it was Everway was a role playing game that came out in the '90s. It's a Jonathan Tweet game, and yeah, I think heavily influenced by tarot. I don't know whether it had a deck, but it definitely used that kind of fortune telling stuff in it. Though I never played it, I wasn't really
Yeah, John just said that in chat. He said Everway's close. So yeah, I don't know. Look into that. Maybe tell me how that goes. That's Albert Knocker. Someone else sent me a question, but I lost it. Trying to find the next. Oh, Judd K. He wanted to know. He says, I guess he asked if he told me to ask some questions, but I will just sort of phrase this in a general sense, and you can kind of give a little bit of a brief overview if you want. He said he wants to know a little bit about the world building in Court of Swords, and how you're taking 5e and kind of making it different but still kind of recognizable as D&D.
Yeah, I mean, I think with D&D, like when you decide to play it as a GM, you acknowledge that the only thing the characters are incentivized to do is overcome violent situations, usually with more violence, but sometimes by like tricking their way through it. So, if you're going to play D&D, all the cool setting stuff in the world really only becomes a backdrop for violence. And acknowledging that, and then finding space to make that interesting, to make that backdrop worth continuing to engage with, was the challenge for the world building stuff. And for me, like I try to pare world stuff down to a few concise elements that matter, and then I let the players kind of spin out in the directions they're interested in. Like for me, the stuff that I was interested in for Court of Swords was a culture that uses the traditional imagery of the tarot as a spiritual like background radiation. And then I was interested in in Southeast Asia and its history, predominantly medieval history, and what that was like. And those two things were really all the stuff that I brought to the table. The players have all done the extra, like the rest of the work, and I'll often take bits and pieces from their characters or things that they mention, and I'll make note of them and then spin that out into other stuff, right? Like there's a kingdom in the game, the Court of Wands, that prior to play, I had no idea any detail or anything about it. And when one of the players made a character from there, I extrapolated from their name and from the accent that the character was doing, and I started to build out the culture from there, and that's sort of grown. And I've been doing that in more or less like all the role-playing games that I've played in the last couple of years. It's just like letting the players put down stakes and then spiral that stuff out. I mean, I think that because it's D&D, it has to be about like fighting stuff and getting treasure and exploring, but we're able to explore in the context of the world of Court of Swords, which is what makes it fun for me as a sort of world exploration exercise.
Yeah, that's like just to add on to that, you kind of touching on an issue that I talked about yesterday with Dodger, and I've talked about a couple times, is that I'm sure you're familiar with Mike Shea's book, The Lazy DM.
Yeah.
So I was saying yesterday that when I started DMing a long, long time ago, I was exactly the opposite of that. I was the kind of guy who like just sort of sit down and write prose about a setting and describing all the things that didn't actually matter, like a city in incredible detail, and like think that was whatever. I did way too much prep, and it really didn't accomplish anything. And I think as I've kind of gone along in the years, I've sort of gotten, as I say, I've gotten quote unquote lazier, in that I plan less and less, and I kind of just work with more and more that people hand me. Though I still like to maintain just a little bit of a little measure of my own kind of control. Because I feel like I don't know. I feel I haven't really ditched the comfort of writing my own stuff and bringing it to the table. Like I can't just shed that completely yet. I don't know. Maybe that'll take a couple years.
It depends on the game, right? That's not a people shouldn't see prep, whether they are doing a lot of it or none of it. They shouldn't see it as independent of the game they're playing. The game should tell you how much prep to do, and you should do that much prep. So if the game demands a lot of preparation, then do it. So you're playing the game right.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. It's not the same for everybody.
Yeah, I was saying yesterday, while I look for a question, a lot of my prep is literally just me monologuing to myself in my car. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that's like warm up. Warm up is a form of prep, right? Like just brainstorming with yourself is totally a thing.
Okay. So Eric Vulgaris wants to know, what do you wish you could change the most about Dungeon World?
I mean, I could tell you that, but then why would you buy second edition? Right? Like, I don't think we can look back at specific stuff and say like, this is the one thing that we fucked up with Dungeon World. Like, I think you can learn about your game as it exists in the world, and you can figure out things that you would tweak or change, or you can find preferences you didn't realize you had in play. You can see things that were unclear. And that's why we produce additional editions of games. That's why second editions of stuff come out. Like if you look at Apocalypse World, the second edition of AW isn't that different than the first edition, but you can tell that Vincent has tweaked and nudged certain pieces so that it feels more like the game he wants it to be, not now, but not the version that he made before. It's not like he's looking back at first edition and saying, I hate this, I'm going to fix it with second. It's just, this is what Apocalypse World should be today in this moment. And I think for me, that's how Dungeon World feels. There's lots of lessons we've learned about the way people interpret the text. We've learned about the way people play the game, and we would change things about it, but not to fix it, but to make something new that stands independent of the previous edition, right? You look at that in any role-playing game, it's not just about repairing the problems. It's about saying, I have a new thing to say using the same language as this game. And they vary, right? Like D&D editions are very different from one to the other in a lot of cases. You look at third and fourth. But there are some games, like Burning Wheel, that change only very gradually over time. And I think that's the product of the designer's vision from the get-go and how that evolves. And then also, like, stubbornness of design. You might really be invested in a particular design, but you're tweaking it and tailoring it to be a new thing. So I don't know that I could point to one specific thing, but I bet you if we do a second edition of Dungeon World, if you compare it to first, you'll see what I've learned by holding the two next to each other.
This I guess an interesting question that I don't really know. Well, I'll ask the other one after, but it says, Niren says, Adam, what is your thought on diceless games such as Undying?
Oh, I like them. I mean, I've played Nobilis, I've played Amber, I've played Undying. What's cool, and I think this is interesting, is that, and we've talked about this lots all over the internet, but I think that if you watch, mechanisms of a game encourage a certain type of play, and that can work in reverse too, where a certain type of play uses similar mechanisms, whether it's Nobilis or Undying. And what I find with diceless games is often diceless games are used to represent characters whose power is more considerable than your average D&D character, right? In Nobilis, you're playing the personification of certain concepts. In Undying, you are immortal predators, above all other mortals. In Amber, you're the fucking gods of Amber. And so, these systems are used to come to terms with the idea that there is no chance, right? That if you want a thing as one of these powerful entities, you get it. You get what you want, unless someone else fights you for it. In which case, you're bidding points, or you're using a different method than randomness, because these entities have stepped above the idea of randomness. There isn't even a 1 in 20 chance they'll fail, unless somebody else butts heads with them. And I really like that about diceless designs. I think they're really fun, and I think they're as valid as randomization. They just ask different questions about what's going to happen in the fiction. It's not about do you succeed or fail. It's about who gets in your way and what's the cost.
Yeah, I've never actually played any. I've never had a chance to play any of them. I've always kind of been of the opinion they probably aren't really for me, in the sense that I've never, like, they probably don't work in the way that I traditionally like role-playing games to work. I don't know. I could be completely wrong, but it's just one of those things that never really struck me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that role-playing games, the thing I would liken to them, like role playing games as a thing, are like music. There isn't anyone really who's going to be like, I don't like music, like at all. Any music at all, like no genre, nothing. I hate the sound of music. The thing, not the movie. Everybody hates the movie. With role-playing games, it's the same thing. I don't think that anybody, if they played enough games and they tried enough stuff, I don't think anybody would be like, no, I just hate all role-playing games. They could hate certain parts of role-playing, but I don't think they would say that. And I think that different systems and different types of narrative that emerge from games, that's where we get this like genre stuff. Not settings necessarily, you know? Like it's not about whether you like fantasy or sci-fi, though that's certainly a factor. It's more like, do you like this kind of narrative that emerges? And diceless games tend towards a less random, more focused on describing the things that you're having and then asking other players, do you step in and get in the way? And that, again, that's a kind of play that may or may not appeal to certain people.
On that note, actually, SinQ2 says, what do you think are sort of the core mechanics that determine a role-playing game's quote-unquote type?
I mean, it's the systems, right? You look at, and I'm sure this has come up here before, and if it hasn't, it'll blow my mind. But Jared Sorensen and his 3 questions about what a role-playing game is. Mm-hmm. You know, like, what is this game about? How is it about that? And how are the players rewarded for doing those things? That's what separates every role-playing game from every other role-playing game, right? Mm-hmm. You know, you can look at a game and you can ask those questions, and if the game is well designed, it'll be able to answer them in the text by looking at it, and that's how you can tell what games are like and dislike other games. But again, the game has to be designed well for those questions to be able to be answered by its design.
Yeah, no, you're right. I actually, I've talked about design. Like I said, I've got my friend designing Open Legend, and I talk to him all the time about like where he kind of comes from, like what, you know, how he decides where he comes from in sort of deciding which mechanics he's going to use to kind of engage the players, which ones he's going to use to reward the players, and I mean, again, most of it is stuff that's it's very strange to me because I'm a DM, but I very rarely think about things in terms of mechanical design, like. So when he was talking about the exploding dice in that game and this and that, like, they're interesting concepts about how you reward a player for doing things that just happen completely randomly, or like or they choose to do, like Open Legend is interesting because it's got the boon the Bane system, which is like you apply an effect if you do 10 or more damage. And you can choose what your Bane is. So like you can say, like, whenever I hit a creature particularly hard, he's bleeding, you know, or poisoned or something like that. So you know, I talk to him about these issues, and that's but that's interesting. I don't know if it's ever come up about those particular questions, but we've definitely talked about game design at least once or twice. Yeah. I want to bring Brian back and now talk to him more because you know, I'm delving a lot more into the core philosophies behind game design these days.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think having a base understanding of the design principles of role playing makes people better at picking games, because games like Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons have a marketing budget, and they use that marketing budget to convince people to play them, but it doesn't speak to whether it's going to be any fun or whether the game is well designed. And so when we can look at a game for what it is, which is to say its design, we can look past the like marketing stuff, we can decide whether a game is going to be for us or not. So I think having that understanding is really helpful for GMs and for players.
No. So that was that one. Stolen 4 says, Adam, when you DM'd the Masks RPG, what was the best part of the system for you?
So Masks is a role-playing game in which you play young superheroes. You play like teenage superheroes in a city with a long heritage of superheroes. Mm-hmm. The game is it's not about being superheroes, because no superhero fiction is about being a superhero. It's about what it's like to be a person struggling with your own identity versus the identity other people place on you. It's about the literal like and figurative masks these characters wear to be other people. Your stats get all like changed by people's opinions of you. It's really fluid that way, which I think is interesting, because people tend to play role-playing games assuming that if my if my strength is 10 now, it will continue to be 10 until like, later when I increase it or a monster takes it away from me. But in Masks, you're judged by these labels, and someone just saying to you like, oh, my character thinks you're being dangerous. Your dangerous goes up, but your savior goes down. And I think it's really cool and really interesting. And it's a game that is designed to be about a certain thing, and all of its mechanisms serve that thing. So I don't know that I would necessarily say that there's any like specific thing, like one thing that I could be like, bam, highlight of this game. I think it's a cohesive design that really like gets me going. The fact that every piece of that game's mechanisms drive towards that goal of exploring what it means to be, a teenager with extreme abilities and trying to figure out what that means for you as a person in this world. I think that as long as we keep getting games like that, like games that are focused on that one thing that they care about, we're going to see more and more games that are like entertaining and interesting to play. We're going to see better games as people take that design stuff to mind and design in that way.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I didn't get a chance to see that show, so it's really interesting to hear that of a system that kind of plays with, I guess. I'm assuming that the people that it's other players and also the world is kind of choosing how your character is perceived and thus who they are, essentially.
Yeah. You like NPCs, like adult NPCs they always have influence over you, and sometimes your fellow teammates can have influence, but you can also reject it, and there's mechanisms for fighting back against the things that people claim that you are or tell you that you are. I mean, it's a game about superheroes in the same way that Monster Hearts is a game about monsters. Like, only kind of.
Suragon931 says, how can I get the most out of a Fate-based game? I'm assuming he's talking about playing Fate Core or something like that. But I don't know. I don't exactly know what he means by most out of it. So, I'm not. I know a little bit about Fate and its splinter systems, but I've never really had time to delve into them.
Fate's mechanisms tend to deviate towards flatness, right? Like, if everything else, all else being equal, your character is more likely to get a middle-of-the-road result, which puts a ton of pressure on aspects and compels. So again, depending on the version of the game you're playing, these can be triggered by different stuff. Make a character whose aspects are going to be fun for you to play. They're interesting to you, and you can think of lots of different ways to leverage them in fiction, right? This is true of, if you've ever played Dogs in the Vineyard, it's the same as writing traits. Like, think about stuff that says something important about your character, but allows you to look for different ways to apply it. And then as a GM, to get the most out of Fate, I think you got to recognize what Fate is good at. Fate is not a generic system. It pretends to be, but it isn't. It tells the same kind of story no matter what setting you're in. And those stories are character-focused pulp stories in which generally, like, really bad stuff doesn't happen to the characters. It can do games in which tension is real, and whether you're going to succeed or not is up in the air, but nothing really terrible will ever happen to your character. Your character will change, but it tends to deviate towards that sort of flatness and the character-focused stuff. So if you want a game that's flexible in the sense that it tells those kinds of stories in a bunch of different ways, and you want a game that focuses on the characters and your impression of the characters, but maybe takes you a bit out of the immersiveness of like being in character all the time, Fate's a good choice. But as with anything else, read the book, play the game. If you don't like it, don't play it again. Right? I think that a lot of people get hung up on systems because it's the first thing they played or because it's what everybody they know plays. But there's lots of games out there. So maybe figure out the stuff that you do like about Fate if it isn't working for you, and like try another game that also does those things because they exist.
Yeah, that's again better input than I can provide because I know very, very little about Fate.
I haven't played a ton of it, but I'm very familiar with Fate and its related games.
Yeah. You know what, my problem that I've been finding these days is there's a lot of systems that I think people expect me to know a lot about, and I have no time to actually play them. You know?
I mean, I guess that's a question that I think comes up sometimes, and I love hearing different people's ideas about this. If if you had to tell somebody like role playing game like masterclass, if you had to play 5 games to like get role playing, like what 5 games would those be? What are the 5 games that you think teach people about role playing? And it's a hard question to answer if you don't have experience with like a lot of games, because it's like
you don't have
missing stuff. And
I mean, it's like I found this out when I was talking to Monty Cook and Sean and Jermaine about their Numenera and stuff like that. Is like I knew a little bit of it because my friends play it on stream, and I've caught a couple episodes, but it's like I know not remotely enough to have a conversation about it. And here I am talking to like the creators of the system, and it's like, they can explain it to me, but I'm massively in the wrong boat, to provide
I think it's
insight.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky talking to like especially game designers about their own game if you haven't already formed an opinion about it yourself, because no matter how much integrity the designer has, you're still going to get a degree of like this game is good. Like no one is going to say like you probably shouldn't buy this game, right? Like a game designer might say if you like this kind of games, you would like this if they have like that degree of integrity. But it's also really hard to completely step away from that, especially if they're making money off their game.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh no, yeah. Obviously, like everyone will try and sell you on their own product. That's because if they've built it, they they think that it's the one that you should be playing. Okay. That was a fate-based one. Tristray says, what is the most surprising thing that's ever happened to you in a game you were GMing?
I think so. Trist, I saw her question in chat, and the fact that she used one of Caitlin's emotes indicates that she knows the answer I'm going to give. So I have a player. We played Mirror Shades together. She's a streamer. Her name's Caitlin, and she is one of the consistently most unpredictable players I've ever played with. The way that her brain interprets and thinks about fiction and the things that she comes up with, like pretty much universally, I find surprising. She's like all over the place, and it's perfect. I love it. Like it's exactly like the right kind of chaos. Mirror Shades where that happened, where Caitlin said something and I just like I had no idea how to react and needed a minute to figure that out. But I think every campaign has had something like that. I think that players, and this is why the sort of traditional I make up a story and you work your way through it mold of role playing really like bores me, because you don't leave yourself room to get surprised. You don't leave yourself space to have your players be like, fuck this, I'm gonna go do something different. I think being willing to play to find out what's gonna happen is really, really fun, because then you end up chasing threads that you never expected to go down. And I try to GM all of my games with that space available, because sometimes the players, instead of getting back on the spaceship, just decide to blow it up with a rocket launcher. And you just got to go with it. So I don't know that I have like one specific moment, but lots of them throughout all the role playing I've been doing recently.
Yeah, I have I don't know if I have one over the like that stands out complete, like one that stands above all of the weird moments in like the time that I've been DMing, which is a decent amount of time at this point, or playing in general. But a couple months ago, I was playing my campaign. We're playing Curse of the Crimson Throne, and I had written in to this adventure path because I'm not a very good writer, in the sense that I'm very bad with just a blank piece of paper and like homebrewing a story and a campaign from nothing. But I'm a pretty good editor in that I'm good at adding things on to and fixing things that have already been written. So I added a lot to this story, and one of the things I added was vampires. And the players were investigating this vampire cult. They went down into the basement, and there's an altar. It's traditional cult stuff, blood everywhere, whatever. And the cult is called the Feasters of the Heart, and there was a heart in a bowl on this altar, and they're fighting the vampire priest, and it's a pretty standard battle. And then the barbarian in the party just decides he's gonna bound across the battlefield, grab the heart out of the dish, and just take a big old bite. And he did, and I was not expecting. I'm like, okay, bite out of the heart, the vampire heart, Yeah, no, that's because in my head I'm thinking like, why would any sane character do this? That seems like something that your brain would be.
I don't know,
screaming.
man. Characters in role-playing games are like toddlers. They are willing to put anything in their mouth. Like,
no, but it's even still like it seems like something any sane person would be like. Don't see a heart. Don't eat it.
Can we just posit that adventurers are not inherently like sane people? Like, you could be a farmer, you could be a priest, you could be a lawyer, you could be anything you want in the whole world, and you've chosen to be a murderous like tomb robber whose job it is to wander around the world, going into the most horrifying, dangerous places and getting in fights. That's what you've chosen as a living? I don't care what your alignment is. You're fucking crazy. Like, you're nuts. So this kind of behavior from D&D characters.
But even still, like you, I think you kind of expect just a little like. You don't see something on the ground and be like, "That's dinner." Yeah,
PCs do. PCs do all kinds of crazy bullshit.
But anyway, he ate the heart, and then I had to spin this whole story about how he is now a vampire, and he is actually beholden. He is like sort of enslaved by the head vampire in the city, who is making him do some weird shit, and actually has been recently killing his close friends and family and like turning them into vampires, sort of to punish him and stuff. But it kind of took me by surprise because it forced me to sort of write all this stuff that I never really expected to have to write. Like a villain that I didn't expect the party to meet for a while is now showing up and like talking to this guy and telling him like, fucking, you work for me now.
I think it's tricky. You got to be careful about punitive responses to unexpected behavior, because I think that's another thing that this sort of traditional Gygaxian style DM will often do, where it's like, you've gone in a direction I didn't expect, and you're doing a thing I didn't expect, so now I have to like put you in your place. And not saying that that's necessarily what you're doing, but like,
it's not at all.
It's definitely a thing that comes up, and I think that when we do that, we're teaching our players, do what I say, follow the story, and don't surprise me. Like, be boring, be predictable. If anything, like that opportunity to be like, cool, well, you're a vampire now. Let's rotate the campaign a little and play it from this angle. I think makes it more fun. I think it gives you a whole new space to explore.
No, it was amazing. It was amazing because obviously it forced me to sort of reevaluate my whole kind of outlook on this character. It was one of those characters that I kind of put off developing, like I developed his story, but I hadn't really developed him as an NPC because he wasn't really designed to show up on screen for a while. So it was like it was going to happen in the future, but it kind of accelerated my plans there, and it kind of made me like it basically made me decide, okay, now this guy's on the field, what does he want? How is he going to use this new tool, this barbarian player, to accomplish the things that he was already trying to do? Like, how are we going to spin this story so now because for some reason it's turned out that whole party has been like a constant cycle of them doing things for bad guys. Like, they just end up working for bad guys, and I mean, that totally makes sense. It's just like, you want to play a game and you want to have a campaign structure that allows you to roll with that stuff when it occurs, because invariably it will, right? Yeah.
Players are unpredictable, which is what makes published stuff so hard to run, because you have to get them to buy into the idea that they need to be a little less unpredictable than they usually would be.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It can be tricky, but again, like, you get that buy-in, and then on the flip side, as a GM, you roll with it when things get weird. Yeah, I actually loved it. My player loved it because his whole character and his whole shtick was he was always after more power, and in his mind, I learned later that biting the heart and becoming a vampire was in his mind, that was a way of kind of becoming more powerful. Like, he just and then it was such an interesting thing. Like, I was monologuing into myself, and I created this sort of dialogue from this vampire about how he's showing up and being like, you only really wanted power because you were weaker and worse than everyone else. And he's like, oh shit, this guy knows exactly who I am. That's I think though, like, I love when players allow me to kind of get in their heads and do things like that. So that's Triss Ray's question. This is interesting. Fake Alex Blue says, I'm about to play Dungeon World for the first time this weekend. I know it's taken me way long to get into it. Any special advice that you'd offer a new player? I mean, I think that like think about the tropes that Dungeon World represents, right? Like, I think a lot of people with a bunch of different experience with role playing games come to a game with this idea in mind that they want to like play or they want to do. And Dungeon World works best when all you come to the table with is this is going to be a fantasy adventure. It's going to contain potentially barbarians and fighters and clerics and rogues like D&D classes. It's going to contain potentially dragons and orcs and goblins, and let yourself come to the table with the idea that there's going to be more to it than that, and that it can be something you won't expect, right? Like the last game of Dungeon World that I played, the only thing that we had prepped in advance, this was for the Patreon game that we did, the only thing we knew in advance was that we wanted to do a space Dungeon World game, that it was going to be set in space. And that's not normally what people think of when they play Dungeon World, but that was like a thing, and we, as a group, we were like, all right, we're just gonna wing it. So we had like space wizards and moon goblins and dark elves in space fighter ships and stuff, and it ended up being really fun. It still felt like Dungeon World, but had we been more aggressive about like this is what it has to be from the get-go, we probably wouldn't have discovered that. And I think coming to the table in any role-playing game with an open mind is the best thing that you can do. Mm-hmm. But also like understanding what the game is about and not undermining that, right? Like coming to the table with an idea that fits the game, or having some general like what Vincent would call apocalyptica in your mind, like some visual images, some ideas thematically that you'd like to explore, bring those with you, and then work together with the group to explore what that might mean in detail. And this question, I know Alex, I know fake Alex Blue, and I know you're going to do a good job because I know what kind of player you are. And this advice, you don't even need it. You already know what you need to do.
I mean, I second that. About coming in with an open mind and just kind of, don't pigeonhole yourself as a player. Just roll with like it's good if my I was talking about this with Dodge yesterday. We were talking about what it means to be a good player in any game. Really, it doesn't matter if it's Dungeon World or anything, but it's like being open to improv, like to rolling with what people give you and helping kind of build a scene instead of shutting things down, I think is probably the most important thing for any game, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's some caveat to that. Like, I think that for a long time, people were just wholesale taking the rules of improv and applying them to role-playing games. Yeah. Which I think is an okay start, but it's not a thing you want to do without considering that there might be alternatives. Like, the idea of yes and is great, except that sometimes, especially as a GM, you want to say no, but. Yeah. You want to say yes, but in a different way. Like, I think that being open to the idea of like building on someone's stuff, but not letting them just like step all over the campaign or all over your idea as a character is important too. Being able to put that stake in the ground and say, this is what's true about my character, and then not letting another player kind of like impact that necessarily. I think it's, we find the firm and soft boundaries of our creative space together by pushing on those boundaries. So I find that a useful phrase is like maybe or what if, right? Like when someone's describing something about their character or about the world, I say, as a GM or a player, if I have an idea, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Well, what if this, right? Like, maybe this is true, right? You're offering it instead of demanding it, instead of saying like, I'm making a declarative statement, which is what improv is all about. Improv is all about saying, this is true, and then having everyone be like, cool, now let's try to incorporate that into the space. I think that role-playing games are inherently a lot more conversational, and a conversation doesn't work when it's a series of declarative statements. It works when you posit things and ask questions, and coming to the table with more questions than statements is always going to give you a better result because you're answering the questions in play. You're curious about what it would be like if the world was like this, or what it would be like if the characters were this way, or what if elves were made of crystal, or what if there are no dwarves in this setting and instead we have robots. Like, coming to the table with questions is always better than coming to the table with statements, in my mind. So that's a thing to take into Dungeon World, but to take into any game. Be curious, be excited, be interested, and try to figure things out through play. Play is a process of discovery.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you. And Fix It Geek, my friend, is happy that someone finally agrees with his no but philosophy.
Sure.
See,
I think it's valid.
I have a similar philosophy about no but it's not that. It's that I just don't like butts.
I think the thing here is that no, but this. We're taught not to say no as GMs.
Yeah.
There's this action reaction thing where like Gary and Dave wanted us to be like, not even no, but shut up, right? Like if someone were to be like, yeah, but Dave, what if elves? And he's like, no, shut up. I have 27 pages of notes about elves. You don't get to talk about elves, right? And then our reaction to that became, we'll say yes to everything, right? That's where the rule of cool comes from, which fuck that. The rule of cool sucks. Because then we stopped playing games. We just started making shit up, and the games didn't matter anymore. And we're coming back to this space where we're learning to creatively say no. We're learning to say, no, but let's not shut this down. Let's say, not in that way. So when someone says, what if all the elves, were like reverse vampires and they had to like hide in the trees during the nighttime, or they would light on fire, and you're like, okay, that's... No, like I have some thoughts about elves, and it doesn't work that way. But I like the idea of them like living in the trees and being diurnal. Maybe like they go into like a slumber form at night. Like let's talk about what in that idea meshes with everyone's responsibility at the table creatively, because the games that we're playing should tell us what we ultimately have authority over, whether it's the traditional GM player authority split where the players have authority over their characters and what they say and do, and we as the GM have authority over basically everything else, or it's a more non-traditional split like in Archipelago where everybody is essentially the GM for a different aspect or theme of the game. Once we know that, once we know what we're responsible for, then we're allowed as players to invite question, to invite what if, to invite maybe. So that way, even though you might not be responsible for a certain thing in the game, I can say to you, oh, what if your character did this? Or what if we had a scene where we were in this place together, right? You're able to posit it as a suggestion rather than to say, now this is happening, and then expect everyone to say, yes, and I'm also there, and let's do this stupid thing I hate. But whatever, you said it, so I have to go along with it.
That's actually very similar to sort of how I end up sitting down with players and building characters at the beginning of every session. It's like people will come, with this idea. It's like, okay, what if I'm a this? And it's like, probably not, but let's see what about that idea is important to you and that we can kind of keep the essence of, so we can create something that you still want to do that also fits with like the lore of the world or something like that.
So the best opportunity I've ever had in a game to kind of wrap my brain around this idea of like world building as a team is a game called Microscope.
I've seen it played.
Yeah, if it's a game you haven't played, it's definitely worth checking out. It very aggressively says, this is what you are in charge of. These are the things you are allowed to say or not allowed to say. Everything else is on the table, and no one can have a finite idea of what the story or the game you're playing is going to end up being at the beginning, because it goes off in various directions as you play. And I think it can be above and beyond being a good game. Like it's a fantastic game, but above and beyond that, it's an exercise in saying, giving up. It's an exercise in saying, I'm no longer responsible for this, ergo I have no right to say no when someone else intrudes on it. And that can be really hard, right? You create an NPC, you create a character, you create a situation, and immediately on the next turn, someone can blow it up. They can say, cool, you introduced this citadel or whatever you're really into. Well, my introduction is a bunch of dragons come and they blow it up. Let's talk about the dragons blowing up your citadel. Because in the game, you can jump back and forth in time. So you can go back and say, okay, but before the dragons, this happened. And you can see where people are interested in it. It's really interesting because you end up with an artifact on the table or on the screen of each person's contribution and what it looked like, so you can see where people were focused and where people wandered around. It's a fantastic game. If your viewers haven't watched it, go check out Microscope. It's really fun. Yeah,
my friends over at Saving Throw did a game of it during their 24-hour stream. That was, I think, the only time I've gotten to see a full game played. But it was really fun to watch, especially when you're hanging out with creative people who like who like exploring that stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of weird games, this is an entirely side topic, but have you ever heard? Are you a fan of like are those kind of smaller like one-page improv systems?
I think for me, like there was a trend in designing like micro games that were like fit on business cards or whatever for a while, and I never really got into any of them because as design experiments, they leave so much empty space that I'm like, if I have to do work to design this game to play it, I'm not interested. Um, I think you can do some cool stuff with the microform. Like, I think LARP does a great job of this. Nordic LARP can fit an entire game on a piece of paper, no problem. But with a tabletop game, it can be trickier. But I mean, I think as a design experiment, trying to make a very small game is cool. But I don't know if it makes playable games every time.
I just think my only because I've never really discussed it as a design experiment, but I think probably my favorite game that is barely a game is Big Motherfucking Crab Truckers, and it's pretty much entirely improv with a dice mechanic thrown in there. Again, I've never discussed whether it makes sense the way it's designed, but it is ridiculously fun to play.
Well, let's talk about it, right? So, okay, so what's the game? What is this game about?
Okay, so Big Motherfucking Crab Truckers is exactly what it sounds like, in that the players play characters that are big crabs and they drive trucks and they do it for the crab goddess. And that's the window dressing. The actual game mechanic is
but hold on. So that's what the game is about, right? It's about being a crab trucker in service to the crab goddess. Okay. So how is the game about that? How do the mechanics of the game
what I said.
How do the game mechanics make the narrative about that?
Well, that's exactly what I said. That's pretty much window dressing because the mechanics have almost no relation to that. Like, it's basically it's an improv system in that the DM will present a problem, like, you need to get through the kelp forest, and one player, and he's like, but there are swinging kelp monkeys and they want to take your cargo, and then the player will start telling a story about how they get through the forest, and they'll tell it and they'll tell it and they'll tell it, and until someone, either another player or the DM, says no fucking way, like, that's not what happens, and then you roll dice to determine who's right, and that's it. That's the entirety of the system.
And how are players rewarded in that system? What do you get for playing it correctly?
There's single thing.
No reward structure at all. So there's no reason to play it by the rules.
That's
except
it.
That you've agreed to play the rules of the game.
That's it.
It actually sounds like the game isn't about what it seems to be about, right? This isn't a game about trying to portray a crab trucker trucking to wherever in service to the crab goddess. It's about telling bullshit stories to each other until someone stops you that happen to be about that thing. They happen to be stories about crab trucking. Right. So really then the reward, I guess the tension mechanism there is telling a story that gets laughs or like gets people like to think it's a good story, and pushing the envelope until somebody stops you, like trying to get as far into that like absurdity as you can.
Basically, yeah.
Right. Okay. So it has maybe more in common with God, what is that game? Munchausen, the Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which is a game very much about like telling horseshit stories about stuff. And
I've not heard about it.
Oh yeah, it's super fun. It's a fairly old game. It's been around for a while, and it's about taking turns telling these like absurd stories about your adventures, and it works kind of in the same way. But in that, it's not a one-page game. It's got a set of rules for telling these stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the design experience, right? To like look at a game and say, what is this game actually about versus what is it pretending to be about, or what does the marketing say it's about, or what do people think it's about? Because the mechanisms of the game tell you what the game is about. And if the only mechanism in the game is, whoa, hold the fucking phone, that's a crazy story, the game is about telling crazy stories till somebody tells you to slow your roll.
And then and then you decide. Yeah, I mean, that's why I say, like, I've never really analyzed it from a game design perspective. I just know it is entirely hilarious, and I love everything about it. Because when you say it to, like, because no one's ever, like, it's one of those things, I think it's presented in such a way that, like, when you say, hey, we're playing Big Motherfucking Crab Truckers, no one's gonna be like, yeah, but can I be an orc? which
Sure.
in
But I think,
theory is entirely possible within the
right.
rules.
Well, no, but that's the thing is you can. You very much can play an orc in that. It's not at all against the rules.
That's it.
Until somebody at the table says, "There's no orcs at the bottom of the sea." I'm gonna stop you right there, right? Like, you can, again, like the crab part and the trucking part and like all that other stuff is just like a gentle suggestion if the game's mechanics only address calling bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. Which is interesting. I think that's a more interesting game than a game about crab truckers. A game about calling bullshit on your friends
is a game already. It's called Bullshit, and
yeah, right.
That's
exactly.
Like we already have that. No, I'm
sure.
That's interesting. Like I've played it before. I've run it before, but I've never actually sat down and been like, is this well designed? Is this how is it like? It's because that's not something I really think about things from. So that's really interesting to me.
And I think you can get an insight into a game by looking at the way that the game is built and whether or not it supports its own goals. And I think sometimes games that are designed poorly can still be fun because the thing that they are designed to do is fun if you ignore the stuff it's pretending to be about. Yeah. Right? It's sort of the inverse thing where like playing Dungeons and Dragons and trying not to get into fights is boring. You can't have fun with D&D that way because you're not engaging the mechanisms. Yeah. Or maybe you can. I can't tell anybody what their fun is like, but you're not playing the game. Whereas like this crab trucker game, if you try to be really explicit about it being only about like certain kinds of stories, you're changing the parameters of the mechanisms and you're functionally hacking the game. It's interesting. I think even games with one mechanism can be really fun. They just have to be well designed. The less mechanisms there are, the more pressure each mechanism comes under.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like when we did it, there is technically class, like you can kind of, it's one of those things where like there's no assigned classes or anything, so you can say like I'm a fighter, I'm good at anything, like anytime there's a role that involves fighting or being strong or something, you can add an extra die to your role.
Right. Well, and that's the choice we're already making when we play Dungeons and Dragons, right? By picking the fighter, you're saying, I want to be able to be correct when I make assertive statements about fighting. Yeah. Right? When I say I hit him with my sword, I'm choosing to play the fighter because I want people to listen and I want to not be countermanded by the rolls that I make in the game, right? Like if you play a wizard and you're like, I hit him with my sword, you're really saying, I hit him with my sword? Yeah. Right? But a fighter can make more assertive statements about that because they've chosen this class because they care about that part of the fiction and they want to be right. They want to be able to have narrative authority over fighting. Now, the fighter is a bit of an aberration in D&D in that everybody fights. It's just the way that you want to be able to make these statements. It's your contribution to the ongoing narrative.
Trust me, I'm with you, and that's actually like again, it's a really, really interesting perspective. I think we'll probably take one more question, and I know it was actually we'll see what we can do. This one is interesting. He says, I would love to hear if Adam has any thoughts about paranoia or games that tend towards the absurd. Now, before you answer that, I know Paranoia. I've played Paranoia. To this day, I'm not actually sure if Paranoia actually has any rules in its rulebook. I know there's a rulebook. Don't know if there's anything written in there.
I mean, I don't have a ton of personal experience with Paranoia. I think that it does a good job of... It does some similar things to Apocalypse World, and Apocalypse World draws you into the world of the game by the way it's written, right? Like Vincent's choice of words in Apocalypse World is very intentional, and using language the way that he does, the structure of sentences, the informality of certain elements of it can make it difficult as a game to parse, but it really helps like thrust people into the experience that he wants you to have in the narrative. And I think Paranoia does that too. I think Paranoia is really good at feeling like Paranoia. It's got a real solid like vibe for what it wants to be, and I think that's admirable. I don't like silliness really that much. Like I don't engage with it very hard. I like I'm into comedy. I think comedy is very hard in role-playing games. I like philosophy in my games. I like personal drama. I like feelings. I'm a big feelings GM. But absurdity and silliness, like the world is already kind of meaningless enough. I play role-playing games to create like meaningful stuff. It's not that every game has to be serious, but I just personally like shy away from that kind of stuff in both fiction and in tabletop games. So Paranoia's level of like goofiness kind of has like pushed me away. But as a game and as a game product, everything that I've seen about it if you like that kind of stuff, it seems interesting, but I can't really speak to the design or mechanisms really of it because I haven't engaged with it because it kind of turns me off as a tone. It's tonally not what I'm into, which is okay, right? I think that good games should turn some people away.
Yeah.
If you try to make a game that everyone will buy and everyone will enjoy, you'll just make a bland game that's not really actually that good for anybody. But
there's an analogy I heard, and I heard this because my brother and my nephew are they're endeavoring to be stand-up comedians, and so they watch a lot of kind of stuff on philosophy about it, just like I talk a lot about the philosophy of gaming and DMing and stuff. And one of the things I heard someone say once was, like, good comedy, like, comedy should have about 50% of the people laughing and 50% of the people, like, not getting it at all, or just not enjoying the premise, because nothing really should appeal to everyone. And I think it's the same. Like, there's no role playing game that's gonna fit everyone's mold exactly the same. Because you said, like, you prefer serious games. I know some people who can't really even if you give them a serious campaign, they will endeavor to make it sort of silly.
Well, I think it's because silliness. You see this happen with Fiasco. People tend towards the gonzo because when we become tense, and improvising anything is a tense thing because you're creating something, you're making up a joke or you're making up an NPC or you're creating a situation, and you want people to buy in, you want people to be like, shit, yeah, this is cool, I'm into it. And there's always that fear that no one will engage, and so we try to break tension often by being silly, because it's easy to get nervous people to laugh, right? To be like, cool, I'm just gonna come up with whatever goofy thing that happens. And so most of the one shots of Fiasco I've played have tended towards the gonzo, and it works for Fiasco because that's what that game is about in a lot of ways. But serious is hard. Serious requires investment. It's why horror role-playing is nigh impossible. Like, it's nearly impossible to play horror games, especially with strangers, especially because people, when they get nervous, they want to be silly. Silliness breaks tension. We don't want to feel tense. Tension is uncomfortable. So there's a whole bunch of psychological stuff that goes into it. I think with Paranoia, I would love to play it with a GM and a group that already really like it. Like, I'm really good at picking up on other people's fun and rolling with it and, like, helping them have a good time, but I'm not invested enough in the idea of Paranoia to run it myself. So if somebody offered, if they were like, I've got this Paranoia game, I'd really like to do a one shot of it, do you want to come try it out? I would probably, like, be into that simply because I learn best from people. I like watching movies with people who really like them, who've seen them before. I like reading books that people love and suggest to me, because then I can engage with it, at least if not for myself, but for them.
Yeah. Paranoia is weird. I love the setting that it builds, like, that it delivers to characters, because it's such a weird and alien, but also, like, humorous and interesting setting that you want to explore. I could not see myself ever playing 2 games of Paranoia in a row. Because it just doesn't. I don't think it's designed for that. It doesn't seem like it's designed for more than, like, anything more than a one shot.
I mean, I don't know, right? Like, it's up to the designers and whether they succeeded or not. I love when a game tells you, like, this is how many sessions you should play of this. These are your options. I like that because it shows that the designer knows about their game.
Yeah.
I think the thing is that, like, any game that's trying explicitly to incur a kind of emotional response has to do so mechanically. This is why, like, Call of Cthulhu and, like, World of Darkness are bad horror games, because nothing about them creates a sense of tension. Nothing.
Which I can assert because I just played the least scary Call of Cthulhu campaign ever.
Call of Cthulhu is not scary. Call of Cthulhu is just like a crappy generic RPG with a bunch of, like, mythos crap on top of it. And World of Darkness is not a game of personal horror. It's a superhero game. It's not Vampire. It's Spawn. And that's fine. They're not games that are designed well, but look at Dread. Dread has a mechanism specifically about creating tension and creating a sense of fear that something horrible is going to happen, right? You're playing it with a Jenga tower, so when it's your turn to do something heavy, it actually matters. Your character could die at any moment, and it will mean something, and everyone will get to see you fuck it up, right? There's a tension there, and that's why I think that, again, mechanisms, and system really matter to the kinds of fiction you're trying to generate. If you just play D&D in a scary setting, it's still D&D, and you can still kill anything with your sword. Yeah. You're still engaging.
Yeah, I've had this conversation a few times, and I've always said, because people ask me about horror all the time. Like I've said, people said I want to write a horror campaign. I want to do this and that. And I say, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter what system you use, but at some level, it doesn't if your player, like, it's all about player buy-in at the beginning. Like, if your players go into a,
sure,
you know,
yeah, I think I'm hearing what you're saying. So that, like, if you don't have player buy-in, then you'll never succeed, no matter how scary.
No, yeah, that's it. Yeah. It doesn't matter, because, you know, if your players don't sit down at the table with their mindset being like, I'm going through the house, like I'm going to play Amnesia, you know, the video game or something like that. Like if they sit down with a character sheet and say, like, I'm gonna fight some stuff today, like, it's never gonna work. It doesn't matter how much work you do as a DM. That's always, like, and there are lots of ways of building tension and drama and kind of creating atmosphere, but for me it's always been, you know, it always comes down to the players, because it's on the players to keep a horror game horror.
Yeah. And again, the same thing. You know, I mean, contrasting with, or maybe in conjunction with, like, Paranoia, like, I think there are funny role-playing games. I think there are role-playing games that will, by default, lean in an amusing direction. Like the Maid RPG is really funny because so much of it is unpredictable, and people find unpredictability really funny, right? Not having control over your character, not having control over the results of things, lots of randomness in the game can feel like really funny, because if everybody's bought into the idea that you don't have all this control, being able to be like, we're all gonna, like, hover around the table waiting to see what the results are in this, like, random event, that can be really funny. You can come up with all kinds of stuff to, like, work with. So I don't know if, like, Paranoia, I find, based on what I know about it, is, like, more, it's, like, kind of satirical, and satire is a very tricky form of comedy. I think that for people that love it, Paranoia is very highly beloved. I think everybody else probably doesn't get it, and I'm in that camp. I don't really get it necessarily. Well, I see what it's trying to do, but I don't buy that necessarily.
That's the thing. Like, I've seen it played. Did you see the Geek and Sundry playing Paranoia? That big thing that
No.
What's his name? Ivan Van Norman DM'd a game of Paranoia, and I watched that, and I think that was my first time I've ever watched, like, a full session of Paranoia played in front of me, and I'm sitting there thinking, like, this is funny and this is interesting. I cannot, like, I can't wrap my head around what could possibly be in the rule book that is allowing all this to happen. You know, because it didn't seem like there were any rules being engaged. The players don't engage with the rules at all. The DM never cites any rules or anything like that. You know, so it's one of those things where it's like, I love what it's trying to do, but I don't understand it from the DM side.
Right. Yeah.
That's just, again, that's just me.
I think that makes sense, right? Like, the game, I'm of the mind that if the game doesn't interject and you still have a fun time, cool, but the game gets no credit for that. Don't tell me that your game is a fun game or a well-designed game because you had a fun time not playing it. Yeah.
All right. So we'll take two questions. One of them's real quick, and then I've got the last one that just came in. So the quick one is, I guess, what celebrities would you like to DM for?
I mean, I already get to DM for celebrities, right? Like, all the people that I play with have, like, a pretty big audience in their own right, and so I don't. This question's like, I'm already playing with a bunch of, like, D&D playing celebrities. I feel like I'm set.
I've already cast my celebrity D&D game. It's The Rock, Mark Hamill, Patrick Stewart, and Ian McKellen.
All those people are too busy to give a shit about Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, that's the problem with.
Don't step on my dreams, all right?
If you look at Critical Role and their thing with Vin Diesel, they got like 20 minutes of game time with that guy, and it's not. Yeah, like, I want to play with people who are fun to play with and who, like, have that sense of, like, being in front of a camera, being in front of an audience, that theatricality, but who actually, like, have time to engage.
Yeah,
my dreams are realistic,
but. I mean, still, you know, it's one of, I don't know, because people have asked me all the time about this, and, like, I just people don't know. I've told him a couple times, though he never answers me. I have a ticket bought, a skydiving ticket I bought for me and Mark Hamill, because that's the last thing on my bucket list. So we're gonna go skydiving together, and so I'm just waiting on the day that he will accept that. But then we will play D&D afterwards. No, I don't know, like, because it's the same thing. You're right. Is like, whenever I think about celebrities, like, you think about people who probably don't necessarily want to be there, or probably like are only there for, like, you know, you may get 5 minutes to hang out with them. I don't even like. I just, there are a lot of personalities that I love to play D&D with, but I'd just be happy with anyone who's really cool and is like into the hobby.
Yeah, like that's the thing. Celebrities make good celebrities. People who are good at role playing games are good at role playing games, and sometimes they're the same thing. But like, I would way rather play with someone who is like awesome and fun to play with, and nobody knows, than some rando famous person with a shit ton of money. Like, fuck that. I don't got time for that. I want to play with people who like engage.
Yeah,
I'm lucky. I'm lucky that way, in that I'm able to exist in a space that contains sort of like both of those things. I've gotten to play with a ton of really amazing players in the last couple of years, and I'm super lucky for that. And I keep getting introduced to more and more like awesome people who are really good to play role playing games with. So it's a nice situation for me. I feel like celebrities are overrated, and that eventually we'll all be like a little bit famous in our own space. We'll be famous to our own friends, right? Like, I think I don't know. It's better to find creative people than it is to find famous people.
Yes, I mean, I'm gonna adopt that philosophy that I'm famous to the 5 people who know who I am. That's it. That's good enough for me.
That's the thing, right? We're not famous. It's like, what is it, Warhol? And we're not famous for 15 minutes anymore. We're famous for 15 people. Like, everybody has 10 or 15 people that look at them and are like, yeah, this person's awesome. They're doing cool shit. I don't know them personally, but like, I see the stuff they're making and I'm stoked about that.
Yeah, I think all mine are probably like in the Philippines or something, like somewhere on the other side of the planet.
The internet makes it so it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, but like, no, because I feel like if there's anyone that ever saw like what I do, like, man, that guy's awesome. Like, I'd want to be like, yeah, but I want to come shake your hand. Like, I want to say hi. Like, let's hang out. Let's get a beer. All right, so let's take the last question from Culture Syndrome. He says, and we'll make this quick. He says, we've seen dice, cards, Jenga blocks, chips, and such used in ways to convey systems. What do you think hinders the experience you look for in a game, and what new systems do you expect/want to see introduced into a game?
I mean, I think if the game's designed well, it doesn't matter if you're, I see them all as like equally valid in different places, right? Jenga towers are good for certain kinds of games. Dice are good for certain kinds of games. Dice lists good for kind of different kinds of games. They all have value in their own space as a kinetic element of playing games. What I think we need to see more of, and what we will see more of, is games designed explicitly to play online with an aspect of either audience participation or some kind of like viewer aspect to them, because that's the space that I live in, right? I want a game that mechanizes that shit, and I want to see it done in an interesting way. The randomization stuff, that's going to be up to the designer, and I don't really care about that. But leveraging the fact that we have technology available to us at our fingertips, and we can generate more complex stuff or do more complex things than we could with a D20 and a D6 and a D8. That's what's going to be real interesting for me. So that integration of like audience-related role-playing games and the fact that we are playing virtually and have the advantage of some virtual tools. I want to see a role-playing game that's designed with that in mind.
I agree in the sense that like I love so I loved when Roll20 came out. For me as a DM who had like all my old D&D friends had since moved away, and I was just kind of by myself in this place, and I didn't really have access to groups of people. Roll20 was like a godsend to me, and so when it started integrating all these features and all that stuff, I was really, really happy. And then I was really bummed when Wizards spent so long not adopting. Like, so many people didn't adopt the digital tool, digital idea of playing games. It took Wizards so long to get into the Roll20 game because they had hitched their cart to Fantasy Grounds, which I'm not going to badmouth. I'm just saying for all of us who use Roll20. But it's finally, we've kind of gotten to that point where every company now is embracing, if you're releasing a book, you need to release a digital copy. You need to release digital copies of your maps, put your shit on Roll20 if you can, because that's where things are, like, that's a new paradigm that we're exploring. And I'm interested to see where games go when they sort of take it, like, I was telling my friend Transy, saying, like, we have Critical Role right now, which is a big kind of budget production about D&D. But it's all private money. Like, they make their own money from subs and stuff like that. I'm really interested, almost in a like morbidly curious way, about what's gonna happen when, like, lots of marketing money and stuff gets into D&D productions. Like, I'm really curious as to what the future of broadcast role-playing games looks like.
I mean, yeah, like, I think you can look at, like, I do shows for Roll20, and I think you can look at that, like, that's a completely sponsored show, right? It's Roll20. It wouldn't exist if Roll20 wasn't sponsoring it, if they weren't putting energy and resources. The budget for paying me to run those shows is part of their marketing budget. And it's about highlighting that we play these games not just because they're fun to play and because we want to show people they're playing role-playing games is great. That's a part of it. But we want to show off, like, specific features and aspects of Roll20 that might be appealing to GMs, right? That's this kind of, like, market-driven sponsored content. And I think, Wizards has their D&D show, right? They have Dice Camera Action. Yeah. That they pay for shit like Acquisitions Incorporated. Right, like, there's money changing hands there.
When I talk money, I'm talking about, like, fucking StarCraft 2, like, League of Legends style money.
If you think that tabletop role playing games will ever have StarCraft 2 levels of money, you are kidding yourself.
Dude, I don't know.
That is a budget. That is a budget that will never exist. It's just not possible.
I don't know, man.
We can get to a place someday where role-playing games are maybe as popular as they were in the 80s, but, like, that's a long-ass slog. I love role-playing games, I love tabletop, but I just don't think that the business model works to generate that much money. Like, I just don't think, it's ever going to reach that big of an audience.
You don't think we're going to get, like, stadium Critical Role type things?
Fuck no. No, God no. Jesus.
See, like, I'm waiting for esports D&D. Like,
man.
I think that's the next evolution.
If it happens, it will it'll be awful at first.
Oh no, that's why I said morbid curiosity. I'm horrified, but I need to see it.
And I mean, you can see this happening, right? You can see people struggling to generate that kind of level of interest, and with varying degrees, right? Like role play, we do great. Critical Role obviously does great. There's a lot of smaller shows that are trying to, like, build up around that space, and there's viewership there. There's people who are interested, but we're latched onto another economic model, right? We're latched onto, like, Patreon or Twitch subs or whatever. There's this other method of us getting money. People are buying in as role-playing games as content, not necessarily role-playing games as a thing to engage in the same way that we would with, like, esports, right? We're not going to get Budweiser presents the D&D Bowl. Like, it's a pipe dream, but that's okay because we don't need that, because role-playing games isn't about that. Role-playing games is about doing, right? It's about encouraging people to play. People watch it. You don't watch professional baseball and sit there and think, like, damn, I could be in the San Francisco Giants. I just got to, like, practice. I could do that. Like, some people have that dream, but it's not fundamentally about that. It's about a different experience. Whereas with role-playing games, every time anyone watches a show that I'm on, I hope that they're thinking, man, I could do this, because they can, right? It's not the same as, like, esports, where you have to spend 8 hours a day every day for years learning how to be good at League of Legends. You can play D&D now. You can play it tomorrow. You can just pick that shit up and make up some stuff with your friends, and you're playing D&D. So I think that it's fundamentally sort of not built around the same monetization system, because once you've bought that game, once you've picked up Dungeon World, you don't ever have to buy another role-playing game again. Hell, you don't even have to buy Dungeon World. Like, we released it for free.
But I think at some point, some marketing exec somewhere is going to be like, man, these Twitch shows are making some money. You know, there's a business. I think there's a business there. And then I don't know.
Selling ad revenue is, like, pretty much the only, like, space where that happens. I think, again, because buy-in as a concept fundamentally deflates what role-playing games kind of do, right?
Oh yeah, no, I'm not denying that.
People engaging in a creative endeavor together. I think this is why we have resistance to some of these shows where people can buy influence in the game with donations.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I personally have a really hard time with those because it feels like going to see a band live and the band is playing and you're like, play F sharp,
which is true.
Play F sharp.
I actually had this conversation on that topic with one of my players because I was really reticent to do like the donations thing for a while, but I opened it up and I specifically tried to keep the donation rewards like really, really small, like like a D6 inspiration, and that's pretty much it. Like, there's other larger things like create an NPC for somewhere in the world, but one of my players was voicing concerns, and I'm like, trust me, I understand, but at the same time, it's difficult, especially when you're on you're a smaller show. Like, it's difficult to kind of invest the time and stuff it takes to make, to keep a channel, running and providing content, and keep it paying for itself.
This is the thing, though. Like, art is hard, right?
I understand. Yeah,
it's totally it's a thing that, like, I think people should be they should be paid for making things that people care about. And I know that there's a lot of different ways to try to get at that, but like fundamentally, when it comes down to it, it's always a struggle to make something cool, like to create and to engage in that endeavor. And I think because we're in this awkward kind of adolescence around streamed role-playing games, there's a lot of different ways to come at it. There's patronage either through Patreon or through something like Geek and Sundry, right? Like Critical Role exists because Geek and Sundry pays for them to exist. But then on the smaller side, like trying to get individual monetary like incorporations from the people watching your show is a way that people have tried to do it, but it is very hard because we look for ways to gamify that. We look for ways to try to get people to engage. And I think that it can run counter to these games that we're playing that weren't designed for that kind of interference.
But on the other end, it helps in a way. I've seen it firsthand that encouraging people to sort of donate money to a Twitch, like a D&D Twitch stream, in a way, like people are paying a couple dollars and it makes them feel like they become a more solid part of a community because they're now they've invested. It's that's, I think that's a way that channels build their community, is they encourage people to participate like that.
I think the thing is that people who absorb content, which is to say all people, right? People, we become entitled to some degree or another to what we hope the outcome of the thing that we're consuming will be, right? When a band releases an album that's different than the album that came before, we're mad because we're entitled to them continuing to be the band that we love. When a character dies in a TV show, we get mad because we were entitled to the continuation of that character's existence. And I think that microtransacting moment to moment in a role-playing game enables that entitlement to a degree where if someone donates $10 and the thing that they paid for happens in a way that they don't like or doesn't happen in the way they anticipated or quickly enough, they can become, it can foster a sense of entitlement. And that, I think, is a point of deflation for the creative process, right? If you have someone telling you, like, I put $5 on this, you have to do it now, eventually the creativity becomes just managing the various clusters of entitlement to be like, okay, I've got 10 healing potions that have been added to the show, and now everybody's healing is way off, so I have to adjust my encounters, and I have to include this NPC this week because they paid for it last week. It can be very, very tricky to do that on a microtransactive.
Just on a flip side, I have friends, a channel that I do a couple shows on. The shows are actually listed down in the corner. Their whole model is viewer interaction. So like at a certain number of retweets or followers or something, they'll do a viewer decision. They just take ideas in chat and make a straw poll, and the people in chat vote on it. It's like, it could be anything. Like whatever the viewers want to happen in the game will happen. And the DM who is DMing on the channel, it's like, and I've run games on that channel, you're kind of beholden to that, which is, it seems weird, but in some cases, not in every single case, but in some cases, it's created a lot of really interesting story moments, and twists and turns and things that work out really interestingly. However, on my end, it was one of those things where I'm like, I respect what they're doing with that because it works for them financially, and they, their audience loves it. It didn't mesh with how I wanted to run my home games, but there's still that kind of nagging sense of like, how do you make these hours that you're streaming kind of pay for themselves?
I think that's the thing, though, is you can't start there. Like, it has to be a passion project first, and then if the audience is there, think about turning it into a business. Like, the idea that it should be like a donation-driven role-playing game from day one so that you can feel like you're getting some money out of the time you're putting into it devalues the value of just getting like social currency with your friends, building this creative endeavor together. That as soon as you enter money into it as a primary motivator, all that other stuff starts to drop away and becomes less valuable. I think it devalues the creative element. If you're like, well, shit, this was a really fun session, we had a great time, we played for 4 hours, but we only got like $40 in donations, totally not worth. You start looking negatively at a thing that otherwise would have been positive. I think that the thing really to strive for in terms of like monetizing a creative endeavor like role-playing games on the internet is you want to have people who buy in not to the individual moment-to-moment shit, not like I'm buying in so that this role will be a 20, but they're buying in because they care about the content, they care about the people making the content, and they think the content will be good whether they are the ones with their hand on the steering wheel or not, right? They're there for the journey, not to drive the car. And so if you can get people to say, like, whatever amount of patronage for a season or for an episode or whatever, that I think gives people more creative structure around being able to just do what they feel is the best thing for the game and for the narrative and for the moment, rather than having to be like, well, we really need to make another $40 before the end of this episode, so I'm going to damage the players more so that people will buy health potions. And I think this speaks a little bit to the problem that we don't have any role-playing games that are designed with this in mind, in that as soon as you start to add in things like adjusting game mechanics, you've fucked up the balance of the game and have to try to unfuck it, and that puts more work on the GM because the game's just not designed to have $5 healing potions. So if we design a game, if somebody or some group of somebodies eventually create a game in which a monetized reward structure is a part of the game, then I think that that's a much more sort of face value approach. But they're going to have to design around the fact that the GM doesn't have, and the players don't have, control over chat or donators or subs input into their game. And that has to be controlled, because otherwise you end up with this just sort of goofy improv thing where you were forced to say yes and to 1,000 people at once, not just the people at the table. Right?
I trust me, I understand where you're coming from. Definitely a lot of interesting points to think about. I think that's probably going to be the last question we're going to take because it is getting late, and I don't want to keep Adam here forever. I know he's probably got stuff to do. So before we get around to bouncing out of here, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone that has hung out with us in chat. All of you guys with amazing discussions and questions. If you did have a question and I missed it, which I may have missed one or two, that's entirely possible. You can feel free to tweet those at me later, and I will pass them around, and we can discuss them. I'm always around to talk about questions on Twitter, that kind of thing. But thank you everyone. Thank you for the follows, all that great stuff. Adam, as always, thank you for hanging out with me, my man. It has been a great talk. It has been great just discussing stuff with you. Why don't you go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about what you get up to and where they can find you on the internet and all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So the easiest place to find me is going to be either on Twitter, Skinny Ghost over there, or on Twitch, twitch.tv/Adam KOEBEL. And you can find me there playing games and talking about game design and shooting the shit about RPGs. When I'm not doing those things, I'm on, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm on Roleplay. I'm a GM there, and you can find that at ItMeJP. We're running a D&D game called Court of Swords right now, and looking forward to starting another game up in the new year. And then I'm running the Adventurers League over at Roll20, and we're also going to be starting another show there by the end of the year too. So you can find me GMing all over the place.
Yeah, all of those links and the logos are down below me. If you want to throw some links in chat, and you're welcome to do that. I didn't set up a macro because I'm terrible at being a host. But once again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone who's been hanging out with us. Before we get out of here, I did have one thing I wanted to do. Oh yeah, you have been watching the Fuzzy Dice Show here on the Exploding Dice channel. My name is Askren. I'm your host and Dungeon Master here. As Dice Thulu has been reminding you, this show it goes on every Tuesday, where I bring in awesome content creators, DMs, streamers, podcast hosts, all that good stuff, and we talk about the craft of DMing. Next week, I'm going to be hanging out with Mr. Mark Holmes from the High Roller Show. It's going to be a great time. We also play live D&D here every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern. We're playing the Jade Region campaign. The logo is just on this side of me, and you can see all of the time and schedule down over in the corner. I also play in 2 other games on the Encounter Roleplay channel, both the Outlanders game, which is hilarious and ridiculous fun in a world that makes absolutely no sense, but it's amazing. And also I am playing in the Storm King's Thunder campaign over there with some of my good friends and some of the best role players that I have the privilege of hanging out with. As always, you can follow me on social media. It's just at Askren. It's right down here. And if you want to keep up with all of the content here on Exploding Dice, including our Halloween special, where I have convinced most of our cast to dress up in funny costumes, you got to hit that follow button, and you will get an alert every time we're going live. Also, all the information is on Twitter. That's really all I want to plug. Big thank you to everyone. Thank you to Adam for hanging out with us. And as we get out of here, just remember, don't let Dice Thulu get his tentacles on you, because he gets very handsy when he does. Thank you everyone for hanging out. We'll see you later. Take care, guys.